Claire Donovan felt the weight of routine sinking deeper onto her shoulders. At 32, she had never imagined her life would turn into an endless cycle of silent disappointments. Her marriage to Ethan Donovan, which should have been a solid and loving partnership, had transformed into an unspoken contract of complacency. Ethan, once attentive and devoted, now seemed distant, more interested in long work hours and his own hobbies than in sharing life with her. And things were about to get much worse than Claire could have imagined. That morning, Claire was preparing for yet another day at work, organizing her thoughts while drinking black coffee in the kitchen of the modest house where they lived. The light coming through the window was soft, but the feeling of emptiness was overwhelming. She adjusted her blouse, noticing in the dining room mirror's reflection the fine wrinkles beginning to form around her eyes. Time was passing, and she felt stuck. Then the phone rang. "Claire, can you come to the office earlier today? We need to get ahead of some things for the afternoon meeting." It was Amanda, her longtime best friend, to whom Claire had always confided her deepest secrets. Amanda had a lively, confident voice, as usual, but something about that call sounded slightly off. Claire didn't think much of it at the time. After all, she was too busy dealing with her own insecurities. Amanda, sure. "I'll be there in an hour," she replied with a slight smile, trying to forget the doubts that plagued her. Upon arriving at the office, Claire sensed the strange atmosphere, as if everyone knew something she didn't. She passed some colleagues who avoided her gaze, making her uncomfortable. Walking past Amanda's office, Claire heard muffled laughter. Curious, she paused before fully opening the door, and through the crack, she saw something that would change her life forever. Ethan, her husband, and Amanda, the woman she trusted most, exchanging complicit glances. Their hands touched in an intimate way, and the closeness between them was enough to make her stomach churn. Claire froze, feeling the ground vanish beneath her feet. The betrayal was clear. Her world, already teetering, completely collapsed in that moment. She could barely breathe, her heart raced wildly, and the blood felt cold in her veins. It was impossible to believe what was before her eyes. Ethan, the man with whom she'd shared her dreams and future plans, was there, cheating on her with Amanda, the friend who had always been by her side. A mix of anger and despair took over her body. She wanted to burst into that room and confront them, but she was frozen, unable to act. Trying to keep her composure, Claire silently walked away, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She knew that if she confronted them at that moment, she would completely lose control. She needed time to process what she'd just witnessed. She left the office without saying goodbye to anyone, the sound of laughter still echoing in her mind. She drove aimlessly through the city's streets, her vision blurred by the tears that finally escaped. It was as if everything she knew and believed had been destroyed in an instant. Claire parked in an empty park, a place she used to go when she needed a moment to think. Sitting on the wooden bench, hugging herself against the autumn chill, she began to question everything. How had she not noticed before? Were Ethan's changes always signs of this betrayal? And Amanda, with whom she shared so much, had their friendship all along been just a farce? She sat there, motionless, for hours. The sky above was turning shades of orange as the sun set. In that moment, Claire made a decision. She wouldn't let Ethan and Amanda destroy everything she'd fought for. She wouldn't be the abandoned, traded, and humiliated woman. She would do something about it, but she didn't yet know how. Back home, Claire found Ethan sitting on the couch, pretending a normalcy that made her even more disgusted. He looked at her with his carefree smile, as if nothing had happened. "Hey honey, how was your day?" She didn't respond. She just observed him, imagining how he had the nerve to betray her and still sit there like the perfect husband. A silent rage began to grow inside her, but she swallowed it, knowing she wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. That night, while Ethan slept beside her, Claire lay awake, staring at the bedroom ceiling. replaying every moment of their relationship. And it was then that an idea began to take shape in her mind. She would no longer be the passive Claire, the woman who allowed her husband to cheat on her. No, she would change everything. And the first thing she would do was end their relationship once and for all. The next morning, before Ethan woke up, Claire left the house. She needed time to think. She drove to her mother's house, an emotional refuge she hadn't visited in a long time. Sitting at the kitchen table of her childhood home brought comforting memories. Her mother, always wise, immediately sensed that something was wrong. "Claire, what happened?" her mother asked, sitting next to her with a cup of hot tea. "He's cheating on me, Mom," Claire said, her voice thick with pain, "with Amanda." Her mother didn't say anything right away. Instead, she placed her hand over Claire's, offering the silent support she so desperately needed. "You'll get through this, dear. You're stronger than you think." Those words stayed with Claire as she prepared for what would be the beginning of her new life. A plan was starting to form, and she wouldn't stop until she made Ethan and Amanda pay for everything. Claire returned home that night with an eerie calm. Ethan continued to pretend everything was fine, and Claire, in turn, pretended to believe it. But inside, she was already planning her next steps. She would be careful, calculating. If Amanda and Ethan thought they'd get away with it, they were gravely mistaken. Fate, however, had other plans for Claire. A few weeks passed, and the anger Claire felt still burned intensely. One day, while driving to work, her thoughts focused on Ethan and Amanda's betrayal. She got distracted. A sharp curve on the road, a truck coming from the opposite direction. Everything happened in seconds. The impact was violent, and the last thing Claire saw before everything went dark was the bright blue sky above her. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't in the hospital as she had expected. She was at home, in the same house she shared with Ethan. But something was wrong. The furniture, the photos on the walls, everything looked exactly as it did 10 years ago. Claire, dazed, looked at herself in the mirror. She couldn't believe what she saw. Her skin, younger, her eyes free from the wrinkles of time and pain. Everything indicated that she had, in fact, gone back in time. The initial shock was followed by a startlingly clear thought. She had a second chance. Claire felt her heart race. The reflection in the mirror showed a version of herself she hadn't seen in years. Her face looked younger, her hair fuller, without the gray strands that had begun to appear recently. It was as if time had reversed, erasing the last 10 years of her life. She ran trembling fingers over her skin, still in disbelief. But the proof was there, right in front of her. And more importantly, she knew exactly what would happen in her life from that moment onward. The shock mixed with a new determination. It was as if fate had given her a second chance, a unique opportunity to fix everything that had gone wrong. Claire left the bedroom, feeling slightly dizzy. The house walls were adorned with old photos, images of her wedding with Ethan, trips they had taken in the early years. She saw the memories of a past that, to her, had become a lie. Not far away, she heard the sound of running water from the bathroom. Ethan. He was there, in the same house, as if nothing had happened. Suddenly, she realized she was back at the point where the marriage still seemed like a dream. The first betrayals hadn't happened yet. Ethan hadn't fully transformed into the man she had learned to despise. Amanda was still her friend, or at least pretended to be. Claire took a deep breath, trying to maintain control. Now she knew what to expect, knew who her real enemy was. But this time, she wouldn't make the same mistakes. This time, she would take control. Minutes later, Ethan appeared in the doorway, a towel wrapped around his waist, his hair still wet. When he saw Claire standing there, staring at him, his face broke into a smile. The same smile that once charmed her, but now felt like a mask. "Good morning, love," he said, as if nothing was wrong in the world. To him, there wasn't, not yet. "Good morning," Claire replied, forcing herself to smile back. But inside, the anger was already bubbling. The betrayal was months, maybe years, away, but she already felt it. What he would do to her, what Amanda would do, was etched in her memory like an open wound. The difference now was that she had the power to change it. She could stop things from happening the same way, and maybe even turn the tables. The following days were an exercise in self-control. Claire found herself watching Ethan in small moments: when he talked on the phone, when he got distracted by the newspaper, when he left for work. With each gesture, she tried to find clues about who he really was. But for now, he seemed like the perfect husband. Attentive, present. It was hard to reconcile the image in her mind with the man she saw before her now. He hadn't started to change yet, and that kept her on constant alert. It was only when Claire met Amanda for coffee that she felt the full weight of her new reality. Sitting in the cafe they used to frequent, Amanda seemed the same as always: outgoing, charming, and always full of funny stories about work. She was the kind of friend everyone wanted. Loyal, fun, a confidant. But Claire knew that behind that smile, Amanda hid a rotten character. Claire knew what she was capable of. "Are you okay?" "You seem distant," Amanda asked with a concerned look. Claire realized she had been staring at her friend with an intensity she couldn't control. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, pretending to be carefree. But inside, she was struggling not to overflow with rage. The woman in front of her had slept with her husband. She had lied to her, whispered falsehoods in her ear while conspiring to destroy her marriage. Claire knew she had to be careful. She couldn't confront her too soon. That would only alert Amanda that something was wrong. Instead, Claire decided she would watch, learn more about both Amanda and Ethan's weaknesses. She knew she had to wait for the right moment to act. Days turned into weeks, and each day Claire felt more in control of her destiny. She began silently planning how to dismantle the life Ethan and Amanda thought they were building at her expense. But at the same time, she knew she had to continue her life, maintaining an appearance of normalcy. That meant keeping her job, her friendships, and, hardest of all, continuing to be Ethan's wife. It was almost unbearable to sleep beside him at night, knowing what he would do in the future. But for now, Claire forced herself to maintain appearances. Her time had not yet come. At work, Claire adopted a new posture. She knew the path to her revenge wouldn't just be about destroying Ethan and Amanda personally, but also professionally. Claire began to involve herself more in company projects, making strategic contacts and ensuring her name was noticed by the higher-ups. She knew that if she wanted to win, she would have to build her own power and influence. It was at this moment that she began to get closer to Alex Turner. Alex was a new colleague who had recently been promoted to a management position. Unlike Ethan, he seemed genuinely interested in her work and was always willing to help. At first, Claire saw him only as another piece in her plan, someone she could use to undermine Ethan's position in the company. But as they spent more time together, Claire began to realize that Alex was different. He treated her with a respect she hadn't felt in a long time. One day, after a stressful meeting, Alex suggested they grab a coffee. "You look like you need a break," he said, smiling sincerely. Claire, who would normally have declined the invitation, accepted this time. She needed a break, and Alex seemed like someone she could relax with, even if only for a few minutes. They went to a nearby cafe, and Claire found herself laughing at Alex's jokes. For a moment, she almost forgot what she was going through. He had a lightness and confidence that made her feel at ease. As they talked, Claire couldn't help but notice the difference between Alex and Ethan. Where Ethan was manipulative and selfish, Alex seemed genuine and transparent. And that made her uncomfortable. She wasn't ready to trust anyone. Not after what she had been through. "You have a great sense of humor," Alex commented, looking at her with genuine interest. Claire smiled but said nothing. Part of her wondered if she could trust Alex, if he could be a real ally, or if, eventually, he too would betray her in some way. But for now, she would let him slowly into her life. She needed more allies, and Alex could be exactly what she needed to defeat Ethan and Amanda. As the days continued to pass, Claire began to feel more and more confident in her decision to play this game with patience. She was in control of her own destiny now, and this time it would be different. She wouldn't make the same mistakes. She would no longer be the naive and betrayed woman. She was building her defenses, forming alliances, and waiting for the right moment to act. But while all of this was happening, one thought persisted in Claire's mind. What if deep down, she was still emotionally tied to Ethan? What if, despite everything, a part of her still loved him? It was a question she wasn't ready to answer, not yet. Claire felt the shift within herself. She knew that behaving as she had before would only lead her back to the same pain, the same betrayal she had already experienced once. So in a calculated manner, she began to change her behavior toward Ethan. Every gesture, every word, every interaction was considered carefully. If before she had been meek and submissive to Ethan's small whims, now Claire had become cold and reserved. She watched him in silence, studying his patterns and behavior with a coolness he didn't expect. Every smile he gave her, every affectionate touch, felt false to Claire, and she responded with distance. It was strange and uncomfortable, but necessary. Ethan began to notice the change. His smile became more forced. His eyes followed her around the house as if trying to figure out what was happening. "You're different," he commented one evening as they had coffee in the kitchen. Claire, always attentive to the smallest details, noticed the unease in his voice. Before, Ethan seemed confident in all his actions, but now there was something unsettling in his demeanor. She glanced at him briefly, but not enough to establish an emotional connection. "Different how?" Ethan hesitated, trying to find the words. "I don't know. It just feels like you're distant." Claire restrained herself from smiling. It was exactly what she wanted. He could no longer rely blindly on the docility she had shown for years. Now he was insecure, and that put her in an advantageous position. "I've just been busy with work," she replied casually, without giving much away. "Maybe it's just that." The response seemed to satisfy him for the time being, but Claire knew he would continue to pay attention. It was only a matter of time before he started looking for answers elsewhere, and she needed to be prepared for that. Besides Ethan, Claire had Amanda to deal with. The falseness of her friend was now so palpable that every encounter between them felt like a silent battle. In the first days after her return to the past, Claire made an effort to keep interactions minimal, avoiding the usual invitations for coffee or shopping. When Amanda called, Claire quickly made polite, disconnected excuses, but always in a courteous enough manner that Amanda wouldn't immediately suspect anything. She knew that abruptly cutting Amanda off would raise red flags. Inside, the anger Claire felt for Amanda grew stronger each day. The way Amanda talked to her, how she acted, how she pretended to be the best friend in the world, made Claire want to scream, but she held herself back, knowing she couldn't rush. Amanda wasn't stupid. If she sensed that Claire knew about her future plans, she might change her strategy, and Claire couldn't risk that. But she didn't limit herself to acting only within her relationships. Claire spent hours in her home office, researching ways to prevent the impending betrayal. She was no longer willing to wait for disaster to happen. She needed a plan. It wasn't enough to simply stop Ethan and Amanda from getting closer. Claire wanted to ensure that when the time came, she would have full control of the situation. She began studying the behaviors of cheaters, the emotional and psychological traps she could use to her advantage. On psychology and manipulation strategy websites, she absorbed information she had never thought to seek before. Claire was determined not to be the victim anymore. It was during one of these research sessions that Claire came across something that completely changed her perspective. In a forum, She read the story of a woman who had gone through a similar situation, a betrayal between her husband and her best friend. In the post, the woman described how she managed to turn the situation around by undermining the trust between the two cheaters without them realizing it. She created small situations that made her husband suspicious of the friend, and the friend suspicious of the husband, until eventually, they distanced themselves on their own, afraid of being caught. Claire began to realize that she could use this tactic. She wouldn't need to destroy their relationship directly. She could plant them in a field of distrust that would destroy them from within. The first part of Claire's plan was to introduce small, subtle changes in the environment. She knew Amanda and Ethan would eventually get involved due to their proximity at work, so she began planting seeds of doubt in Ethan's interactions with other women. She noticed that Ethan always seemed satisfied with the attention he received from other colleagues at the office, but he never gave it much importance. However, Claire knew this could work in her favor. During casual conversations with Ethan, she began to comment on how a new colleague, Rachel, seemed interested in him. "She always looks at you curiously," Claire said one morning as Ethan was getting ready for work. "Have you never noticed?" Ethan laughed, finding it amusing. "Rachel? No, she's just friendly." Claire smiled inwardly. This was the start. She wasn't worried about Rachel. The woman was harmless and in a committed relationship. But the mere fact of planting this idea in Ethan's mind would already make him question the nature of his interactions with the women around him. When trust began to erode, Claire knew Ethan would become more paranoid, more vulnerable. At the same time, Claire was carefully adjusting her relationship with Amanda. They still spoke, but Claire was no longer as open as she used to be. She began limiting the amount of personal information she shared with Amanda, keeping their conversations superficial. When Amanda asked how things were with Ethan, Claire responded with a simple "everything's fine" without giving any details. This subtle distance made Amanda start questioning their friendship. She was no longer receiving the same level of intimacy as before, and Claire knew this would make her uncomfortable. One particularly revealing afternoon, Claire and Amanda went out for lunch together. Amanda seemed cheerful and carefree as usual, but Claire could see beyond the surface. They were talking about weekend plans when Amanda, in an almost casual tone, asked, "And you and Ethan? Doing anything special?" Claire looked at her calmly, analyzing every nuance of that question. Why was Amanda so interested in her plans with Ethan? It might have been an innocent question, but knowing what she knew, Claire couldn't help but be suspicious. "Maybe," she replied noncommittally. "We haven't decided yet." Amanda nodded, smiling neutrally. But Claire knew that behind that smile, there was a mind at work, planning. Now more than ever, Claire needed to stay one step ahead. As the days passed, the coldness Claire displayed at home also began to unsettle Ethan. He still didn't know how to deal with this new version of his wife. She was no longer the submissive woman he could control so easily. She was more reserved, more independent. At night, when they lay in the same bed, Claire kept her side of the mattress clearly defined, avoiding any kind of intimacy. Ethan tried to approach her a few times, but Claire rejected him with simple excuses, like being tired or worried about work. He was starting to feel the distance. And while Claire knew it frustrated him, she also knew she was only just beginning to orchestrate her plan. As the weeks went by, Claire mentally prepared for the next steps. She knew that to prevent the betrayal and ensure that she was the one controlling everyone's fate, she would need to act with precision and patience. The idea of destroying the relationship between Amanda and Ethan, without them even realizing she was involved, was tempting, and Claire was ready to move forward. Claire felt more in control, but the new coldness in her relationship with Ethan was beginning to weigh on her. Maintaining that emotional distance all the time required a strength she hadn't anticipated. At work, she managed to keep up appearances, but the psychological exhaustion was constant. It was on one of those exhausting days, while finishing reviewing a project, that Alex Turner entered her life. It was an ordinary afternoon at the office, and Claire was focusing on the pile of reports in front of her when she heard someone knock on the divider of her cubicle. She looked up and saw Alex, a tall man with slightly messy brown hair and a friendly smile on his face. He was holding some papers and introduced himself directly. "Hi, you're Claire, right? I'm Alex Turner, new to the team. I needed help with these marketing reports, and they said you're the go-to person." Claire, surprised by the approach, simply smiled politely, motioning to the chair in front of her desk. "Sure, I can take a look. Do you have any specific questions?" Alex sat down, and as they discussed the technical details of the reports, Claire noticed something unexpected. Alex's presence made her feel curiously at ease. He had a light, uncomplicated way of speaking, turning what was usually a tense atmosphere into a much more relaxed one. The conversation flowed naturally, and she soon realized that, besides being incredibly charismatic, he was also very competent. Unlike Ethan, who always acted calculated and superficial, Alex seemed genuinely interested in the work, without hidden agendas. In the days that followed, Alex sought out Claire to ask questions or share opinions on the projects they were developing. At first, she kept her distance. The trauma with Ethan was still an open wound, and the last thing Claire wanted was to allow herself to trust someone so soon. She knew how dangerous it could be to open up, even if it was just a simple friendship. But despite her reservations, she couldn't deny that Alex brought an unexpected lightness to her day. One afternoon, while the two were reviewing more reports together, Alex made a comment that caught Claire by surprise. "You know, you seem different from everyone else here." "I mean in a good way," he said, flashing a quick smile. "It's like you're here, but at the same time, you're not, if that makes sense." Claire paused for a moment, staring at the papers in front of her. He had noticed. Somehow, Alex had picked up on something that even the people closest to her hadn't. No matter how hard Claire tried to maintain the facade of a normal life, there was something about her that set her apart. She was living a double life on the outside. She was the same dedicated professional as always, but on the inside, she was plotting revenge, dealing with the imminent betrayal, and preparing for the silent war against Ethan and Amanda. "It's just work," Claire replied, trying to mask the vulnerability she felt surfacing. "I've been really focused lately." Alex smiled understandingly, but didn't press further. He seemed to understand that there was more to Claire than she was willing to show at that moment, but unlike others, he didn't push. This was the moment Claire began to lower her guard a bit more. Alex wasn't intrusive. He was just there, a constant and reassuring presence, without expecting anything in return. As the days went by, Claire realized that Alex was becoming more and more of a support system. He didn't ask personal questions and respected her space, but he was always willing to help. Whether solving last-minute work problems or suggesting a coffee break after a tough day, he was there. This subtle presence, almost like a relief in the shadows of her mind, was something Claire hadn't expected. Slowly, Alex began to fill a space that had previously been empty. Despite the growing closeness between them, Claire remained cautious. The trauma of what she had experienced with Ethan and Amanda was a constant reminder. Even though Alex seemed completely different, genuine, caring, and so far, without secrets, Claire knew she couldn't afford to trust anyone blindly. The last time she did that, she ended up betrayed and shattered. One day, after a tense meeting, Alex suggested they go out for a drink after work. Claire, who would normally have declined, hesitated. "I think I need to get home early," she replied, trying to maintain the barrier she had created. "I understand," Alex said, not looking offended. "But sometimes, getting out for a bit can be good, you know, even if it's just to shake off the week. I promise I won't keep you long." Claire looked at him for a moment, considering. She knew she wasn't ready to fully trust Alex, but maybe, just this once, a break wouldn't hurt. "All right," she said, finally giving in. But just one drink. They went to a bar near the office. The atmosphere was cozy, with dim lights and soft music. Claire sat at a table in the corner, away from the noise, and Alex ordered 2 glasses of wine. They began talking, first about work, then about hobbies and lighter topics. Claire was surprised to discover that Alex had a sarcastic and witty sense of humor, something that made her laugh genuinely, something she hadn't done in months. She found herself lowering her guard more than she had intended, letting slip small details about her life, like her passion for photography, something she had abandoned when she started dealing with Ethan's betrayals. At one point, Alex spoke about himself in a way Claire hadn't expected. "I've been through a lot too," he said, without going into details, but enough for Claire to realize that he wasn't just another colleague with a perfect life. He also had his own scars. "I think sometimes we find each other in people when we least expect it." Claire was silent for a moment, processing those words. It was true. Alex had appeared in her life when she least expected it, and despite her initial resistance, there was something about him that made her feel that, in a way, he understood her even if neither of them said it out loud. But Claire knew she had to be careful. As much as she felt a connection with Alex, she couldn't forget what was at stake. She was still entangled in a web of lies, conspiracies, and revenge that needed to be resolved before she could even consider trusting someone completely. And besides, Ethan was still part of her life. Even though she was determined to get her revenge on him, there were still moments when Ethan tried to regain the closeness they once had, unaware that Claire already knew every one of his dirty secrets. As they said goodbye that night, Claire felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that she had let her guard down for a few hours, allowing herself to forget, even briefly, the weight she was carrying. But apprehension because, deep down, she knew Alex was becoming an important part of her life, and that meant she could eventually get hurt again. In the weeks that followed, the closeness between Claire and Alex continued to grow, and despite her fears, she found herself trusting him more than she trusted anyone else. He was her confidant at work, her companion in moments of tension, and in a way she couldn't explain, he brought a calmness that no one else had brought before. However, Claire still kept her secrets well guarded. As much as Alex made her feel safe, she knew there was still a long road ahead before she could finally rest. With the newfound closeness she had developed with Alex, Claire began to observe the workplace with a sharper eye. She knew that Ethan's future behavior would be marked by ambition and manipulation, using the company to achieve his goals, no matter who he needed to take down in the process. Now, with the chance to change things, Claire decided she needed solid information to destroy him before he had the opportunity to do the same to her. One afternoon, after a tense meeting with the marketing team, Claire casually mentioned to Alex that she had noticed some inconsistencies in past reports. She knew that, even before he started betraying her, Ethan was already involved in questionable maneuvers within the company. It was how he always managed to stand out, manipulating data and taking advantage of more vulnerable colleagues. Claire had realized, the first time she lived through that period, that Ethan often fudged numbers to make himself look more competent than he really was. But back then, she was too naive to understand what was happening. Now, however, everything was clear. Alex, ever attentive, looked at her with sudden interest. "What do you mean by inconsistencies? Is something wrong with the reports?" Claire hesitated for a second, remembering that she couldn't reveal all her intentions immediately. "I think some numbers might be inflated, but it could be a mistake, of course. I'm thinking of looking into it more, just as a precaution." He nodded, showing slight concern. "I can help with that, if you want. Since I'll be reviewing a lot of these reports for the next projects, we might as well make sure everything's in order." Claire smiled, grateful for the offer. Alex's support was proving more valuable than she had expected. With him by her side, it would be easier to expose Ethan's mistakes without raising too many suspicions. In the days that followed, the two of them began examining reports from previous months, cross-referencing data, analyzing spreadsheets, and identifying small discrepancies in the numbers. Nothing glaring at first, but the mistakes were there, scattered across various sheets like small drops of poison waiting to become a crisis. With each spreadsheet they reviewed, Claire's anxiety grew. She knew she was on the right track, but she still didn't have definitive proof she could use against Ethan. As much as the manipulations were becoming apparent, everything seemed too subtle, too easy to dismiss as human error or simple calculation mistakes. And she needed something more concrete, something that would truly incriminate him. It was on one of those days, after a long afternoon of work with Alex, that a significant discovery was made. While reviewing the spreadsheets from a marketing project 6 months ago, Alex noticed a significant discrepancy in the numbers attributed to a specific supplier. It was much larger than the others and completely out of line with the patterns they had been observing. "This doesn't make sense," Alex commented, frowning as he examined the details of the transaction. "This supplier should never have received that much money. Something's really off here." Claire leaned closer to the screen, scrutinizing the spreadsheet carefully. She knew it was a deliberate error. Ethan had inflated the numbers on purpose, probably diverting the money elsewhere. It was the kind of fraud that, over time, could go unnoticed but, if thoroughly investigated, would have serious consequences. The feeling of being one step closer to bringing Ethan down made Claire feel euphoric. "We need to look into this supplier," Claire said, trying to hide her growing excitement. "If we can find out where that money went, we might have something concrete." Alex agreed, immediately taking action. He sent discreet emails to the relevant departments, asking for additional information about the transaction. Claire knew she had to be patient now, but the anticipation of finally exposing Ethan left her restless. She was beginning to see the possibility of not only avenging the personal betrayal, but also destroying him on a professional level, and that motivated her even more. In the following days, while they waited for responses from the financial departments, Claire began preparing for the final confrontation. She knew that when Ethan discovered he was being investigated, he would react defensively and possibly aggressively. He would never admit his mistakes willingly and would try everything to come out on top. Claire would need to be careful, use the information correctly, and above all, ensure that he was caught with no way out. Finally, the answers arrived. The suspicious transactions revealed that the supplier involved was a front, a fake company that Ethan had likely created to siphon money from the company. It was the proof Claire needed. She spent hours poring over the documents sent, confirming her suspicions and aligning the evidence in a clear and irrefutable way. The feeling of finally having something against Ethan was liberating. Alex, who had stayed by Claire's side throughout the process, was visibly impressed by the magnitude of what they had uncovered. "This is going to ruin his career," he said gravely. "If we take this to the higher-ups, Ethan will never work in another company again." Claire felt a wave of satisfaction course through her. It was exactly what she wanted. Ethan deserved to be punished for everything: the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation. But despite everything, something in Claire left her feeling uneasy. As much as she was eager to destroy Ethan, part of her still felt the emotional weight of the entire process. She knew this would change her life forever. There would be no turning back. Alex, always perceptive, noticed Claire's internal conflict and tried to reassure her. "You're doing the right thing, Claire. He deceived everyone. He can't go unpunished." Claire knew he was right. Ethan deserved to pay for everything he had done. And now, with the evidence in hand, she was ready to put her plan into action. That night, while reviewing the final details of the evidence, Claire felt a mix of relief and anxiety. She knew that from this point on, things would never be the same. The confrontation was imminent, and Claire was preparing to face the consequences, whatever they might be. Claire spent days preparing for the moment when she would confront Ethan. The evidence of his fraud was organized, the suspicious transactions detailed and documented, the fake supplier's name, the embezzled amount, and the emails proving Ethan's involvement formed a web of information that would be impossible for him to deny. She knew the impact of these discoveries would go far beyond their relationship, ruining his reputation within the company and likely throughout the industry. Each night, Claire found herself sitting at her desk, going over the documents, imagining how Ethan would react when confronted. Her hands still trembled slightly at the thought of his anger, his ability to manipulate, which she knew all too well. Ethan would never admit guilt easily, and she needed to be ready for his resistance. But at the same time, Claire knew this was the only way to ensure he wouldn't escape. That morning, as she left for work, Claire found Ethan already ready, casually drinking his coffee. He seemed so calm, so at ease, that for a moment, Claire wondered how she had allowed things to get to this point. But the feeling quickly passed. Ethan was no longer the man she thought she knew, and everything he did now seemed like one big lie. Claire looked at him with a mix of contempt and contained anger. She knew what was about to happen would change everything, and in a way, she had already accepted that reality. She arrived at the office earlier than usual. Alex was already there, waiting for her. He had been a fundamental support throughout the process, always by Claire's side, reviewing every detail and ensuring nothing was left to chance. With him by her side, Claire felt she had the strength to face what was coming next. "Are you ready for this?" Alex asked, looking at her seriously. Claire nodded, trying to hide the slight tension she still felt. "Yes, it's time." With the materials in hand, Claire and Alex headed to the office of the CFO. She knew this would be the first step. The finance department needed to be informed before anyone else. The director, Mr. Collins, was a fair and meticulous man, and Claire trusted he would take the accusations seriously. When they arrived, Collins was already waiting, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Claire, Alex, please come in. I was intrigued by what you sent me in the email. It seems serious." Claire handed the documents to the director and began to explain. As she spoke, detailing the embezzlement, the fraud scheme, and Ethan's involvement, Collins listened attentively, flipping through the pages with an increasingly serious expression. Alex remained silent beside her, but his presence was a constant reminder that Claire wasn't alone in this fight. When she finished, silence hung in the room for a few moments. Collins looked at the documents for a few more seconds before lifting his gaze. "This is extremely serious," he said, his voice grave. "If what you're saying is confirmed, Ethan Donovan is in serious trouble. We'll need a formal investigation." Claire nodded, feeling a wave of relief mixed with anxiety. She knew this was the first step to taking Ethan down, but she also knew things would get much more intense from this point forward. "I'd like both of you to keep this absolutely confidential for now," Collins continued. "We'll initiate an internal audit immediately, but we need to be careful not to raise any suspicions until we have all the evidence." As they left the office, Claire finally exhaled, feeling a bit more at ease. The process had begun. Now she just had to wait. In the following days, tension at the office rose. Claire knew the audit was underway, and it was only a matter of time before Ethan was confronted. The atmosphere around her felt denser, and she avoided interacting directly with Ethan. She knew he would notice any change in her behavior, and she couldn't allow him to suspect anything. Meanwhile, Alex continued to be her constant support. He was always nearby, making sure Claire stayed calm and didn't let anxiety take over. Even with all the tension in the air, there were moments when they laughed together, briefly distracting themselves from the imminent chaos. Claire found herself thinking more and more about Alex and how he had entered her life just when she needed him most. He was different from anyone she had ever known, and that connection both scared and comforted her. One night, when Claire was alone at home, Ethan came home later than usual. He looked exhausted and irritated, and Claire felt her heart race. She knew the internal investigation was already affecting his work, and it was only a matter of time before he was called in to explain himself. "Tough day?" Claire asked casually, trying to hide her nervousness. Ethan sighed, throwing his briefcase onto the couch. "Yeah, the office is a mess. They're doing an internal audit without warning. No one knows why. It's causing chaos in the department." Claire felt a pang of satisfaction hearing that. The trap was closing around him, and he had no idea she was behind it all. "That's strange," she commented, trying to sound disinterested. "Do you think they found something serious?" Ethan glanced at her, but his expression didn't reveal much. "I hope not," he said quietly, "but something doesn't feel right." Claire stood up, walking slowly to the bedroom, feeling the weight of the tension in the air. It was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. 2 days later, the inevitable happened. Ethan was called to the CFO's office, where the audit team was waiting for him. Claire knew this was the moment when he would have to face the evidence, and she was ready to see him fall as he deserved. That afternoon, Ethan came home earlier than usual, visibly shaken. His usual confident and arrogant demeanor was weakened. Claire could see the tension in his eyes, and when he finally spoke, his voice was filled with frustration and fear. "Something really serious happened at work today," he said, almost in a whisper. "They're accusing me of fraud, Claire. I don't know how this happened, but they're saying I embezzled money from the company. This is absurd." Claire looked at him, feeling a satisfaction that almost made her smile. Inside, she knew this was the moment she had been waiting for, but on the outside, she remained calm. "What do you mean? Do they have proof?" Ethan shook his head, desperate. "They're saying they have documents, transactions that I supposedly approved, but I swear I didn't do anything wrong." Claire watched him in silence, letting his words fill the room. She knew her life was changing forever in that moment, and for the first time in a long time, she felt she was in control. In the days following Ethan's confrontation with the fraud accusations, Claire felt relief, but a lingering restlessness remained inside her. Although her revenge was unfolding as planned, one part of her life was still filled with uncertainty. Her feelings for Alex had grown silently over the months they had spent together. Yet, every time she caught herself thinking about him, an inner voice warned her, trusting again could be a mistake. Alex, on the other hand, was always close by, and his presence had become a pillar of support. He never pressured her, but was there whenever she needed him. One evening, after another long day at the office, they went out for a drink. It was becoming a routine that Claire had started to look forward to, despite her reservations. They sat at a corner table at a quiet bar, and the conversation flowed as easily as always, light and without pressure. But there was something different about that night. Alex seemed more thoughtful, and Claire sensed he was about to say something important. "I know you're going through a lot," Alex began, his eyes reflecting a seriousness Claire wasn't used to seeing in him. "But I want you to know that you can trust me. I know it's hard, especially after everything you've been through. But sometimes, trusting someone is what helps you move forward." Claire looked at him, feeling the weight of those words. She knew he was right, but the idea of lowering her guard and letting someone else into her life again terrified her. It wasn't just Ethan and Amanda's betrayal keeping her distant. It was the fear that if she allowed herself to trust again, she would end up getting hurt once more. "It's not that simple," Claire said softly. "After everything, it's hard to trust people. Sometimes it feels impossible." Alex was silent for a moment, taking a sip of his beer before speaking again. "I understand. More than you might think." He looked away briefly, as if gathering the courage to continue. "I went through something that made me question everything. Trust in people, in the world, in life itself." Claire felt a wave of curiosity rising. Alex had never spoken much about himself, always preferring to focus on her or work. But now, he was about to reveal something deep, something that might explain the quiet calm he always seemed to carry with him. "A few years ago, I was engaged," he began, his tone more restrained. "I loved her more than anything. I had plans. I was ready to spend the rest of my life with her. But weeks before the wedding, I found out she was cheating on me. With my best friend." Claire felt a tightness in her chest hearing that. It was impossible not to see the mirror of her own story in what Alex had just confessed. She had never imagined that he had gone through something so painful. Alex always seemed so centered, so in control of his emotions, that it was hard to imagine him being broken by someone he loved. "I didn't know how to deal with it for a long time," Alex continued, now looking directly at her. "I distanced myself from everyone, buried myself in work, and swore I'd never trust anyone like that again. But the truth is, we can't live in fear forever." Claire remained silent, absorbing every word. She understood what Alex was trying to say. She knew he was right. But still, the pain she carried felt like an unbearable burden. Trusting someone meant opening up the possibility of being hurt, and Claire wasn't sure she was ready to take that risk again. "Sometimes trusting someone is the only way to heal those wounds," Alex said softly, almost as if he were reading her thoughts. "But only you can decide when you're ready for that." Claire looked at him, feeling an unexpected warmth in her chest. Alex had become more than just a colleague or an ally in her journey for revenge. He was becoming someone she could rely on, someone who seemed to understand her in a way few ever had. But allowing herself to feel more than that, it was something Claire couldn't quite process yet. "I think, for now, all I can do is try," Claire admitted, her voice low but firm. "I still have a lot to figure out. But maybe, with time, things will change." Alex smiled at her, a patient and understanding smile. He didn't seem to have immediate expectations, and that comforted her. There was no pressure for her to change overnight. All Alex was offering was support, and Claire realized that, for now, that was more than enough. In the days that followed, Claire and Alex continued to work together, but something had shifted. There was a new sense of camaraderie between them, a mutual understanding that didn't need to be spoken. They had shared their pain, and it connected them in a deeper way, even if Claire was still reluctant to define what she was feeling. Ethan, meanwhile, was being consumed by the ongoing investigation at the company. His behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and he had stopped talking openly with Claire, probably because he was beginning to suspect that she knew more than he realized. Claire knew Ethan's downfall was near, but while that unraveling was still in progress, she focused on keeping her life as stable as possible amid the turbulence around her. One night, after another heated argument with Ethan, Claire received a message from Alex, asking if she wanted to go out to clear her head. Without thinking much, she accepted. Meeting him had become a welcome relief in the midst of the chaos. When she arrived at the bar they usually went to, Alex was already there with 2 drinks waiting. They sat in their usual corner, and Claire realized that, for the first time in a long while, she felt a little lighter. "How are you?" Alex asked, with the same quiet concern he always showed. "Better now," Claire replied honestly, taking her drink. "You've been a huge help to me, you know that?" Alex smiled, a calm and reassuring smile. "You've been good company too, Claire. And for the record, you're a lot stronger than you think." She smiled back, appreciating the sincerity in his words. It was as if Alex saw something in her that she struggled to see in herself. And at that moment, Claire realized that maybe trust in him wasn't as frightening as she thought. As the night went on, their conversation flowed easily, as if the weight both of them carried was, for a brief moment, lifted. They shared more stories, laughed at silly jokes, and for a few hours, Claire allowed herself to forget the chaos of her life. When they said goodbye that night, There was a new feeling in the air, something Claire didn't yet know how to define, but that, somehow, made her feel more alive. That morning, Ethan entered the house earlier than Claire expected. His face was contorted with restrained anger. She knew this moment would come the inevitable confrontation. The tension that had been building between them for the past few days had finally reached a breaking point. Ethan was growing more suspicious, and Claire had remained silent, waiting for this moment, knowing she needed to stay calm to avoid revealing her true intentions. "Claire, can we talk?" His voice was cold, but there was a demanding tone he had never used with her before. Claire put her phone down on the kitchen table and slowly turned to face him. He was no longer the man she had known at the start of their marriage. Now Ethan looked like a shadow of who he once was, dominated by fear and the growing pressure of the company's investigations. "Sure. What do you want to talk about?" Claire kept her voice firm, showing no hesitation. Ethan crossed his arms, his eyes locked on hers, as if trying to read her thoughts. "You've been different for weeks. I know something is going on. Do you think I don't notice? You're distancing yourself, acting strange, and I want to know why." There was urgency in Ethan's words, as if he was desperately trying to regain control. Claire took a deep breath, taking a moment to gather her thoughts before responding. She knew she couldn't reveal everything, not yet. She needed to be careful. "It's work, Ethan. Things have been complicated, and I've been trying to deal with it the best way I can. If I seem distant, it's because I'm focused on resolving some issues." Ethan laughed, a dry, sarcastic sound. "Issues? At work? Or are you hiding something from me?" He stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Don't think I don't know something is happening at the company. There are rumors, investigations, people getting fired. And now you're acting like you have nothing to do with it. I want the truth, Claire." Claire felt her pulse quicken, but she remained calm on the outside. This was exactly the reaction she had expected from Ethan. He was being cornered, and like any predator backed into a corner, he was trying to fight back in every way he could. "I already told you, it's just work. And if there are investigations, it's because the company needs to make sure everything is in order. I have nothing to do with it." Ethan slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "Don't lie to me. I know you're involved in this somehow. You think I don't notice? I'm not stupid, Claire." She looked him directly in the eyes, refusing to back down. She had spent too much time preparing for this moment, and nothing about Ethan's behavior intimidated her anymore. "If you're so afraid of investigations, maybe you have something to hide, Ethan. What's really going on at the company? Is there something I should know?" For a brief moment, Ethan seemed thrown off, as if the idea that Claire knew something had caught him off guard. He hadn't expected her to turn the question back on him. Claire knew she was buying herself time, and that time was crucial. She had to keep Ethan on the defensive, making him doubt himself. "You don't understand. They're accusing me of things I didn't do," he said, his voice now softer, almost pleading for understanding. "But you're treating me like I'm guilty. Why are you on their side?" Claire watched him, trying not to show the growing satisfaction she felt as he stumbled over his own lies. She knew exactly what he was talking about: the fraud he had committed, the money he had diverted. The evidence was all there, ready to be used against him. And Ethan was desperate, trying to gain her sympathy before everything came crashing down. But Claire had already made her choice. "I'm not on anyone's side, Ethan," she replied calmly. "But if you have something to hide, you'd better deal with it before things get out of control." Ethan stared at her for another moment, his eyes filled with suspicion and fear. Without saying another word, he turned and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. Claire remained where she was, feeling the tension slowly leave her body. She had managed to stay in control, and now Ethan was more confused than ever. He knew something was wrong, but he still couldn't figure out how much she already knew. The next morning, Claire arrived at the office earlier than usual. She was determined to continue with her plan and knew she needed to act quickly. The audit was still ongoing, but now she had discovered a new opportunity. While reviewing the company's documents over the past few days, Claire had found something that could be the key to exposing Ethan once and for all. One of the older financial reports, which had recently been reviewed, showed suspicious transactions from a branch of the company in another state. Claire didn't immediately know how Ethan was involved, but the amount of money being moved was significant enough to raise questions. And Ethan's name appeared as the one who had approved some of those contracts. She took the report to Alex, who was waiting for her in his office. "I found something important," she said, handing him the document. Alex quickly flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowing as he read. "This is serious. If we can connect these transactions directly to Ethan, there's no way he'll get out of this. We can use this to expose everything." Claire nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. Yes, this is the moment. With Alex's support, Claire began compiling all the necessary data. The transactions, Ethan's signatures, the approved contracts, it all pointed to a scheme much bigger than they had initially imagined. Ethan was involved in a network of fraud that extended far beyond the local branch. He had been manipulating numbers across multiple states, and the financial impact could be devastating for the company. As Claire worked in silence, adrenaline surged through her veins. Finally, she had everything she needed to take Ethan down once and for all. Now, it was just a matter of deciding the right moment to reveal the truth. She knew that when everything came to light, Ethan's fall would be inevitable. And this time, there would be no turning back. After the confrontation with Ethan, Claire knew there were more things to investigate, more hidden secrets. The situation at work was becoming increasingly unsustainable for Ethan, and he continued to act more and more desperately. But Claire couldn't afford to let her guard down. Deep down, she knew Ethan hadn't given up on trying to manipulate the situation to his advantage. If he could, he would try to shift the blame or make someone else the scapegoat. That night, as Ethan slept on the couch in the living room, Claire found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed over the past few months. She looked at his face, now marked by tension and fear, and couldn't help but feel a whirlwind of emotions. The love she had once felt for Ethan had turned into deep resentment. But beyond the revenge, there was something else that unsettled her: freedom. She felt on the verge of a new life, a life without the shadow of Ethan and the betrayal he represented. Yet, even with the sense of imminent victory, Claire knew she needed to be careful with her next steps. She couldn't let her emotions interfere. Ethan's downfall was close, but there were still details to be worked out, and any wrong move could ruin everything. That's when, in the middle of the night, she remembered a conversation she had had with one of Ethan's co-workers months ago. While organizing the office documents, Claire realized there was something important she had overlooked until now. She vaguely recalled a comment made by one of Ethan's secretaries, saying that he kept detailed records of all his dealings on a personal laptop, separate from the company's system. Claire knew that if she could get access to that laptop, she could discover more than just the financial fraud. She could fully expose who Ethan really was. The next morning, when Ethan left early for a meeting with his lawyers, Claire saw her opportunity. The laptop he frequently used was stored in his home office. She knew Ethan was careful, but his haste over the past few weeks had left him vulnerable. Claire entered the office cautiously, and upon finding the laptop, began looking for passwords or clues that could help her access its contents. After several frustrating attempts, she remembered something simple yet crucial. Ethan's password for many personal accounts used to be a combination of their birth dates. Claire quickly typed in the combination, and to her surprise, the access was granted. There, in front of her, was a collection of emails, documents, and illegal contracts that Ethan had carefully hidden. As Claire navigated through the laptop, she found more evidence of financial fraud. But something else caught her attention: compromising conversations between Ethan and other members of the board. Besides manipulating numbers and embezzling money, Ethan was involved in corruption schemes, including bribery to secure contracts with major suppliers. It was far more than Claire had imagined. The discovery left Claire with a mixed feeling of shock and triumph. She now had something that would not only destroy Ethan's career, but also lead to serious legal consequences. Knowing the next phase would be decisive, Claire made copies of all the important files, saving them to a USB drive and sending some to her personal email, ensuring she had multiple ways to access the evidence in case something went wrong. With all the evidence gathered, Claire knew it was time to execute the first part of her plan. She spent hours refining the documents, reviewing every detail, and preparing the report she would deliver directly to Ethan's superiors. Anxiety and tension built as the moment approached, but Claire felt more determined than ever. She had the concrete proof in her hands, and there was no way Ethan could escape. That morning, Claire arrived at the office with her heart racing, but outwardly, her posture was impeccable. She made her way to the finance department, where she had arranged a meeting with the company's directors, including the CEO, who was still unaware of the extent of the fraud. Alex, who had been a constant pillar of support throughout the investigation, accompanied her. He had reviewed the documents with her and, on several occasions, had suggested ways to make them even more compelling. When they arrived at the meeting room, the directors were already waiting. The large windows allowed natural light to flood the room, but Claire felt the air inside was heavy, thick with tension and uncertainty. Sitting at the table, she felt the weight of everyone's gaze on her and began her presentation with a coldness and confidence that even surprised herself. "Thank you for meeting with me," Claire began, keeping her voice steady. "What I'm about to present to you today involves a series of financial frauds that have occurred within the company. The person primarily responsible for these frauds is Ethan Donovan, head of the marketing department." The room fell silent. The directors exchanged glances, and Claire could feel the disbelief in some of them. Ethan was considered an exemplary employee, always praised for his competence and results. None of them expected such a serious accusation. In recent months, I have been collecting evidence showing a series of fraudulent transactions, contract manipulation, and the diversion of funds to a shell company created by Ethan. "Everything is documented," she continued, opening the folder of documents and distributing them around the table. The directors took the papers and began examining the numbers, graphs, and printed emails. As the minutes passed, their expressions shifted from skepticism to shock. Claire could pinpoint the exact moment when they began to understand the gravity of the situation. The evidence was irrefutable, every detail meticulously explained. Claire had left no room for doubt. The CEO, an older man with a stern expression, looked at Claire with a seriousness that almost made her flinch. "These are extremely serious accusations. Are you aware of the implications this will have for Ethan's career and for the company itself?" Claire nodded without hesitation. "I am. But I believe that keeping someone like Ethan in the company would be more damaging than exposing these frauds. He used his position to manipulate numbers and divert large sums of money. This needs to be treated with the seriousness it deserves." The CEO looked at the other directors, all still absorbing what they had just read. He sighed deeply and then turned to Claire and Alex. "We will initiate a formal investigation and suspend Ethan immediately. If the evidence is confirmed, he will be terminated and prosecuted." Claire felt a wave of relief wash over her. The first step had been taken, and Ethan's downfall was about to begin. She and Alex left the room, fully aware that a storm was brewing. Now, all Claire had to do was wait. That afternoon, when Ethan returned to the office, the impact was immediate. He was summoned to the CEO's office, where he was confronted with the accusations and the evidence Claire had provided. The shock and disbelief on his colleagues' faces as he walked down the hallway said it all. Ethan still didn't know that Claire was behind the exposure, but he knew his career was in jeopardy. Hours later, Ethan emerged from the CEO's office, visibly shaken. His normally confident and controlled demeanor was now broken. He knew his position in the company was hanging by a thread. Claire, watching from a distance, knew he would try to find a way to turn the situation around, but the evidence was too solid to be ignored. She had calculated every step, and now she just needed to watch as Ethan began to unravel. When Ethan came home that evening, his face was pale, and his eyes were filled with fury and desperation. Claire, who was in the kitchen, pretended not to notice his entrance, continuing to calmly chop vegetables. She could feel his gaze burning into her back and knew the confrontation was imminent. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Ethan's voice was low, but it carried the weight of his anger. Claire slowly turned to face him, keeping her composure. "Knew about what?" she asked, her tone bordering on indifference. "The accusations, the fraud. You knew this was happening, and you didn't warn me? Why didn't you say anything?" Claire stared at him, finally allowing the truth to show on her face. "Why should I? If you made mistakes, it's your responsibility to deal with them, not mine." Ethan took a step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're lying. You knew all along, didn't you? Are you trying to destroy me, Claire? Because that's exactly what's happening. They're ruining my career." Claire felt a chill spread through her chest but kept her voice firm. "You ruined your own career, Ethan. I'm just watching as you pay for everything you've done." Ethan's fury exploded all at once. He grabbed a chair and threw it against the wall, the sound echoing through the room. "You'll pay for this. I won't let them take me down so easily." Claire stepped back, watching the scene with a coldness she didn't know she possessed. Ethan was losing control, and it only reinforced her certainty that her plan was working. He was unraveling at work and at home. And now, he was resorting to desperate measures. In the weeks that followed, Ethan did everything he could to try to save himself. He spent hours on the phone with lawyers, hiring specialists to review the evidence, and attempting to discredit the accusations. But the more he tried, the more it became clear that his efforts were futile. The frauds were well documented, and the company's directors were determined to clear the company's name. Claire watched from a distance, keeping herself far enough away that Ethan wouldn't suspect her direct involvement. She knew he was drowning in his own lies, and there was no escape. His position at the company was formally suspended, and the criminal investigation gained momentum. Ethan, who once saw himself as untouchable, was now on the verge of collapse. Claire was mentally exhausted. The past few months had been a whirlwind of emotions, and even though the plan against Ethan was progressing, a part of her still couldn't find peace. The deceit, the betrayal, and the constant emotional manipulation by Ethan had left deep scars. She focused on keeping her composure, but inside, she felt the weight of everything piling up. And amid all this, Alex continued to be her rock. However, each time he came closer emotionally, Claire found herself torn between trusting him or keeping her distance, afraid of being hurt again. One evening, after another tense day at work and at home, Claire found herself going out with Alex. They met at the same bar as usual, but something felt different. Since they had grown closer, Claire had always sensed that, despite his warm and charismatic demeanor, Alex carried something dark from his past, something he rarely let show. That night, however, Claire felt he was ready to reveal more than usual. They ordered 2 glasses of wine, and for a while, the silence between them was comfortable. Then Alex broke the mood with an unexpected question. "Have you thought about what you're going to do after all this? After Ethan is out of your life?" His voice was calm, but there was a depth that suggested the question came from a more personal place. Claire hesitated. She had been so focused on taking down Ethan that she hadn't really thought about what would come next. And besides, what did out of your life even mean? Would it really be possible to erase what Ethan had done to her completely? I don't think I have, she admitted, staring at the wine glass in her hands. I'm just tired of living with this pain, with the feeling that he'll always be one step ahead. I need closure. Alex nodded, looking at her with understanding, but there was something in his gaze that Claire couldn't fully decipher. He remained silent for a while, as if deciding whether he should say more. Then, finally, he took a deep breath and began speaking. I understand that feeling, more than you think. Claire looked up, curious. Until then, Alex had shared little about his past, only briefly mentioning the engagement that had ended in betrayal. But now there was a different intensity in his voice. She stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. Do you remember when I told you about my engagement? About how I was betrayed by the woman I loved and by my best friend? Alex began, maintaining eye contact with her. Claire nodded. She had never forgotten the impact that story had on him, especially because it felt so similar to her own experience. What I never told you was what happened afterward, Alex continued. His voice was heavier now, as if the words were being drawn from a deep place within him. I was completely lost. I thought I'd never get over it. My fiancée. She not only betrayed me, but she made it clear that everything we had was a lie. The worst part was that she and my friend started playing dirty to destabilize me. I worked with him at the time, and they started using my emotional instability against me, trying to make it look like I was mentally unfit. It almost cost me my job. Claire remained silent, absorbing what he was saying. She felt the weight of each word and understood even more why Alex had become so important to her. Not only was he helping her in the present, but he understood what it was like to be emotionally shattered, just like she had been. That's when I realized I couldn't just move on without doing something. I wanted revenge too. I needed to feel like I had some control over what was happening to me. He paused, taking a sip of his wine. So I came up with a plan to make sure they paid for everything they did. Claire leaned in slightly, intrigued. What did you do? Alex smiled slightly, but there was no joy in his expression. I exposed both of them at work. The truth about the betrayal, the dirty games they were playing against me. But unlike what I had imagined, it didn't bring me peace. Yes, they were fired, and yes, everyone sided with me. But deep down, I still felt destroyed. The revenge, though satisfying for a while, didn't erase what they had done to me. Claire felt a chill run through her. She had never heard Alex speak so candidly before, and his words hit her deeply. As much as she wanted to believe that Ethan's downfall would bring an end to her pain, hearing Alex now, she started to question if that would really be possible. Why didn't you tell me this before? Claire asked, feeling the tension rise inside her. It seems like you understand what I'm going through better than I thought. Alex shrugged, looking uncomfortable. I guess I didn't want you to think I was trying to tell you what to do. Your situation is yours, and you have every right to follow your own path. But seeing you fight so hard, I thought maybe it was time to share. I just didn't want you to go through the same emptiness I did afterward. Claire leaned back in her chair, feeling a knot of emotions forming in her chest. She had spent so much time orchestrating her revenge that, for the first time, she questioned whether it would really bring the satisfaction she so desperately sought. There was a part of her that believed that once Ethan was out of her life, everything would get better. But listening to Alex, she realized she might be chasing a sense of justice that wouldn't come the way she expected. And you? She asked, almost in a whisper. How did you move past it? Alex sighed, looking at her with an expression that mixed pain and acceptance. It took me a long time to realize that I couldn't let what they did define me. The betrayal broke a part of me, but I realized that, in the end, it was my choices from that moment on that would determine who I really am. Getting revenge was necessary, but moving forward was even more important. Claire didn't know what to say. She felt an even deeper connection to Alex, but at the same time, she was terrified of what that meant. He was right, taking Ethan down wouldn't erase the pain of what had happened. The difference between them was that Alex had found a way to move on, and her? Was she willing to do the same? As they left the bar that night, Claire realized something inside her had shifted. She had grown closer to Alex in a way she never expected, and although she was fighting against it, she knew he was already a part of her life in a way she could no longer ignore. But at the same time, she was afraid that by trusting again, she would end up hurt once more. Claire sat at home, mentally reviewing everything she had done up to that point to expose Ethan. There was something dark about the feeling of imminent victory, as if, by reaching her goal, only emptiness would remain. She had always imagined that taking down Ethan would bring her internal peace, but now that she was so close, she didn't feel the satisfaction she had expected. Her phone vibrated, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. Claire opened it, and as she read the content, she felt the ground collapse beneath her feet. It was a photo of Amanda, visibly pregnant. The caption read, "Your husband is going to be a father." Claire froze. The blood drained from her face, and her body went cold. She couldn't believe it. Amanda and Ethan were expecting a child? Everything Claire had gone through, all the betrayals, the plans to dismantle Ethan's career, all seemed small and insignificant in the face of that revelation. A child was about to be born from this betrayal, and despite all her efforts to destroy Ethan, Claire felt defeated. She collapsed onto the couch, her hands trembling as she held the phone. Everything she had built in her mind, the meticulously planned revenge, the desire to see Ethan pay for every lie, every cruel act, crumbled all at once. A new reality was forming before her, one she had never anticipated. The fact that Ethan and Amanda would be connected forever, not just by betrayal, but by a child. Claire tried to take a deep breath, but the air seemed to escape her lungs. The pain hit her in a way she hadn't expected. She had always known Ethan was capable of betrayal, but a child? This went beyond anything she could have imagined. Her thoughts began to race. Now what? What remained of her plan? Destroying Ethan's career was still important, but that wouldn't erase the fact that he would have a new life with Amanda. They would be parents. They would have something together that she could never destroy. Slowly, Claire began to question everything. All the effort she had put into her revenge, would it really bring peace? Even if Ethan lost everything, his career, his reputation, he would still have Amanda and their child. And what would she have? The sense of emptiness grew. She had thought that by destroying him, she would find some relief, some closure. But now, it seemed that no matter what she did, the pain would remain. A part of her life would always be connected to Ethan, not by choice, but by what he had done. Unable to contain herself, Claire grabbed her phone and called Alex. Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable when he answered. "Alex, I need to see you, now." Within 20 minutes, Alex arrived at Claire's house. He came in hurriedly, clearly concerned about her state. "What happened?" he asked, rushing toward her with worry in his eyes. Claire said nothing. Instead, she handed him the phone with the picture of Amanda. Alex took the phone, and as soon as he saw the image, his expression changed. He looked back at Claire, speechless at first, trying to process the gravity of the situation. "She's pregnant, Alex. Ethan is going to have a child with her." Claire finally found her voice, but it was thick with pain and disbelief. "All this time, all my planning, and now none of it seems to matter. He's going to move on with his life, with her, while I'll still be here, alone." Alex sat down next to Claire, still holding the phone. "Claire, this is heavy," he sighed, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not going to lie to you. This changes a lot, yes. But it doesn't diminish what you've done. what you've accomplished so far." Claire shook her head. "I thought that by destroying him, I would finally find peace. But now, nothing I do will erase this. He's going to be a father, Alex. They're going to have a life together." Alex looked at her, seeing the pain in Claire's eyes. "You always knew that revenge wouldn't erase the pain, Claire. But I understand why you did what you did. And despite everything, you can't let this destroy what you've built for yourself. Ethan may have a child with Amanda, but that doesn't mean you've lost. You still have a life ahead of you." Claire let out a deep sigh, feeling small under the weight of reality. Alex was right, but that didn't make the situation any less painful. "I know, but it's hard to accept. It feels like, in the end, he's still going to win." Alex turned fully toward her, holding her hands between his. "He won't win, Claire. Not in the way you're thinking. The life he's building now is based on lies and manipulation. You, on the other hand, have the chance to build something real. And when this is all over, when Ethan is out of your life, you'll realize that he wasn't worth it. None of this pain was worth it." Claire closed her eyes for a moment, trying to absorb Alex's words. He was always so solid, so balanced. And now, more than ever, she felt that he understood what she was going through. Still, the fear of continuing to live with this pain paralyzed her. Alex, sensing her inner conflict, moved closer. "I know it seems impossible right now, but trust me, it will get easier. And I'll be here by your side to make sure you don't go through this alone." Claire opened her eyes and met Alex's gaze. There was a sincerity there that she couldn't ignore. The connection between them, despite all her fears, was real. And in that moment, she knew that, despite everything, she wasn't truly alone. Ethan and Amanda could have whatever they wanted, but Claire still had control over her future. Alex stayed by Claire's side, holding her hands firmly as she tried to process the news of Amanda's pregnancy. The pain, still raw and intense, seemed to grow inside her. "I never expected this to happen. A child? I knew they were together, but now. This is forever, Alex. I'll never be able to escape this reminder." She abruptly stood up and began pacing the room, her heart racing and her thoughts spinning. Everything seemed to be falling apart, and Claire felt that the control she had fought so hard to maintain was slipping away. "Everything I did was for nothing, wasn't it? Now they have something I can never destroy. A life that's going to come out of this." Alex watched her, knowing he needed to be patient. He had been through something similar and knew that Claire was being consumed by emotion. "It wasn't for nothing," he said calmly. "You can't measure the success of your plan only by what happens to Ethan and Amanda. You did this for yourself. What they have, or what will happen with them, can't take away your strength. And honestly, Claire, a child doesn't change the fact that their relationship is built on betrayal. It won't last." Claire stopped and looked at Alex. There was something comforting in his words, but the fear that he might be wrong prevented her from fully calming down. "How can you be so sure? How do you know they won't just move on with this child and forget everything they did?" Alex shrugged, stepping closer to her. "Because I've seen it happen before. I've seen how lies corrode anything that tries to grow on top of them, no matter what they do. The guilt, the betrayal. It's going to poison their lives, even if they seem fine on the surface." Claire, still grappling with the emotional devastation, sat down again, breathing deeply. Alex came closer and sat next to her, reaching out and placing his hand over hers. "And you?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. "Do you really think you can forget what happened to you? Or will you always carry it with you?" Alex looked at her, his gaze softer and filled with understanding. "I carry it, yes, but I don't let it define me. At first, I thought my life would never be the same. I pulled away from everyone, tried to rebuild on my own, and for a while, it felt impossible. But then I realized that it's possible to move forward. The pain doesn't go away, but it changes, it transforms. You learn to live with it without letting it destroy you. I did, and you will too. Claire lowered her eyes, the silence between them now heavy with unspoken emotions. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't know if I can let go of all this. Alex smiled slightly, squeezing her hand firmly. You don't have to be ready right now, and you don't have to do it alone. You have me, and you're much stronger than you think. His words echoed inside her, and for the first time, Claire allowed herself to believe that maybe there was a way out. Maybe the revenge against Ethan wasn't the end of everything, but the beginning of a new phase, one where she could finally free herself from the past. And as she looked at Alex, she felt that maybe she wasn't as alone as she had thought. The night passed slowly. Alex stayed by Claire's side as she poured out her fears, anger, and frustration that she had been holding inside for so long. For the first time, she openly talked about how deeply she felt betrayed, not just by Ethan, but by the hand life had dealt her. Alex listened carefully, without judgment, simply offering the support she so desperately needed. When dawn came, Claire felt that something inside her had shifted. The pain was still there, but it seemed more bearable, less overwhelming. She knew she would have to deal with the consequences of Amanda's pregnancy, but she also knew she didn't have to do it alone. Before leaving, Alex hugged her, a gesture of comfort that she accepted without hesitation. I'm here for you, Claire. Anytime, don't forget that. After he left, Claire stood in the room, looking out into the darkness outside. For the first time in a long while, she felt a small spark of hope. Ethan and Amanda might have a child, but that didn't mean her life was ruined. She still had control over her future. And with Alex by her side, perhaps she was ready to believe that a different future was possible. A future where pain wasn't her only companion. In the days following the revelation of Amanda's pregnancy, Claire found herself confronted with a more bitter reality than she had anticipated. She was already dealing with the pain of betrayal, but now she had to face the idea that Ethan and Amanda would form a new family. Despite this emotional blow, Claire refused to back down. Her plan to ruin Ethan's career was in motion, and she knew she was close to seeing him lose everything. Ethan, on the other hand, was growing increasingly desperate. He realized that the situation at work was becoming unsustainable, and the accusations against him were mounting. The company was making progress in their investigations, and it wouldn't be long before his position was entirely compromised. With the walls closing in around him, Ethan decided that his only way out was to try to manipulate Claire, the one person he still believed he could influence somehow. One afternoon, when Claire arrived home, she found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, a carefully calculated expression of desperation on his face. He looked defeated, as if the pressure of the last few days had finally taken its toll. Claire knew this was part of his game. She knew Ethan well enough to recognize when he was trying to gain sympathy. However, she also knew she had to be cautious. He no longer had the power to manipulate her, but he could still try. "Claire," he began, his voice almost pleading, "we need to talk. This is all getting out of control. I don't know how all this happened, but I need your help." Claire watched him for a moment, noting how he was trying to appear vulnerable, a strategy Ethan rarely used. He was never the type of man to allow himself to seem weak, but now, with his career on the line, he was willing to do anything. "Why should I help you, Ethan?" Claire responded, her voice cold, devoid of any compassion. "After everything you've done, why should I even consider helping you?" Ethan sighed deeply, leaning forward in his chair as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I know I made mistakes, Claire. I know I hurt you. But, don't you see? I was lost, and Amanda. I thought I felt something for her, but now I realize how stupid I was." Claire remained silent, watching him, evaluating every word. She could clearly see what he was trying to do. Ethan was attempting to flip the situation, painting himself as the victim, hoping Claire would feel pity for him and help him out of this mess. But that wouldn't work on her anymore. Not now. You think saying that is going to change anything? Claire asked, her voice emotionless. You think apologizing is going to make everything disappear? Because, honestly, it won't. What you did, Ethan, is irreversible. You betrayed me, manipulated me, and now you want me to help you? Ethan shook his head, as if struggling to maintain his composure. Claire, you don't understand. If I lose my job, I lose everything. I can't let that happen. Think about what we had before all of this. Think about what we were. Claire felt a surge of anger rise within her. Ethan was still trying to use their past as a weapon, as if, somehow, he could evoke the feeling she once had for him. But all of that was dead. He had destroyed any chance of reconciliation when he chose to betray her trust. What we had, Claire repeated, her voice cold and sharp. What we had was a lie. You destroyed everything, Ethan. And now you're reaping what you sowed. Ethan fell silent, realizing that his words weren't having the desired effect. For a moment, Claire saw genuine desperation in his eyes. He knew he was losing, and that there wasn't much more he could do to regain control. Claire, on the other hand, felt stronger than ever. For the first time, she was completely in control of the situation. Ethan no longer had any power over her. Claire, please, he said, once again appealing to her emotions. I don't know what to do. If they fire me, I lose everything. I lose the chance to take care of my child. Amanda is pregnant. I need this job to support my family. The mention of Amanda's pregnancy was the final blow. Claire felt a cold rage coursing through her body, but she maintained her composure. She stood up slowly, looking directly at Ethan. You should have thought about that before. Ethan, you should have considered the consequences before you betrayed your wife. Before you manipulated everyone around you to get what you wanted. Now you're going to have to deal with the consequences on your own. She turned her back on him, feeling that any remaining trace of compassion she might have had was gone. I'm not going to help you, Ethan, and you know why. Without waiting for a response, Claire walked out of the kitchen, leaving Ethan alone with his despair. She knew he was lost, and that he was finally beginning to realize that there was no way out. His career was crumbling, just like the life he had built on lies and betrayal. In the following days, the investigation at the company moved quickly. Ethan's superiors were determined to clear the company's name, and the evidence against him continued to pile up. Claire, watching from a distance, knew the plan was working. Ethan was about to lose everything, and this time, there was no one left for him to manipulate, no one to save him. Alex, always by Claire's side, helped her stay focused. He knew how much the situation with Ethan affected her emotionally, but he also knew how much she had grown since everything began. Claire was no longer the vulnerable, naive woman Ethan had once controlled. She was strong, resilient, and determined to move forward no matter what happened. You're almost there, Alex said one day as they walked through the park. He won't get out of this. Claire looked at him, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. I know. But as much as I want to see him lose everything, I still feel like none of this will erase what he did. The damage is already done. Alex nodded, understanding. You're right. Revenge won't erase the past, but it will give you the chance to move forward without looking back, knowing he paid for what he did. Claire took a deep breath, knowing Alex was right. Even with Ethan's downfall, the pain she felt wouldn't disappear overnight. But now, with the plan nearly complete, she finally saw a light at the end of the tunnel. Ethan's end was near, and with it, a new phase of her life was about to begin. Claire was beginning to feel the weight of her own strength. Ethan was on the verge of collapse, and her plan to destroy his career was nearly complete. But to her surprise, the person who came into her path wasn't Ethan, it was Amanda. One afternoon, as Claire was leaving work, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Amanda asking to meet. Claire was intrigued, unsure of the motive behind the request. She knew something was off, but curiosity won, and she agreed to meet Amanda at a cafe. When Claire arrived, Amanda was already seated at a table in the back, wearing sunglasses, clearly trying to avoid being recognized. She looked different from what Claire remembered. There was something fragile in her posture, something Claire wasn't used to seeing in the always confident and manipulative woman. Amanda looked tired, maybe even scared, as if the brightness she used to exude had faded. Claire sat down silently, waiting for Amanda to speak first. "Thank you for coming," Amanda began, her voice lacking the arrogance it once had. Claire simply nodded, showing no emotion. She knew Amanda was in a vulnerable place, and the sight of it didn't stir compassion in Claire. Instead, seeing Amanda insecure and on the verge of collapse only reinforced what she had always known. That deep down, Amanda was as fragile as anyone else. The power she wielded over others was a facade. And now, Claire was certain that it was starting to crumble. "I don't know how to begin," Amanda continued, visibly uncomfortable. "I know you must hate me. I know I've done terrible things, but I'm scared, Claire. Things with Ethan aren't good, and I don't know what to do anymore." Claire remained impassive, watching Amanda as she spoke. What should have been an apology felt more like a desperate attempt to regain some kind of support. Amanda was feeling the pressure, and for the first time, Claire realized just how much Ethan was also destroying Amanda's life. But that didn't generate pity. On the contrary, Claire felt a strange satisfaction seeing Amanda like this, lost and unsure of where to turn. "And you think I'm going to help you?" Claire finally broke the silence, her voice cold and cutting. Amanda swallowed hard, clearly surprised by the harsh response. "You think, after everything you've done, I'm going to extend my hand to you?" Amanda lowered her eyes, her hands trembling on the table. I didn't know what to expect. It's just that things are spiraling out of control. Ethan is becoming more unstable. I thought we had something, but he's changed. And now, with the investigation at work, I don't know what's going to happen. Claire knew exactly what was happening. Ethan was losing control, and with him, the entire life he and Amanda had built on lies was falling apart. Amanda, for the first time, seemed to realize that she too was disposable to Ethan, just as he had discarded Claire. And now, Amanda was trying to find a safe haven, maybe even trying to get close to Claire again, believing that somehow it would protect her. But Claire had no intention of helping her. She looked directly into Amanda's eyes, feeling the long-contained anger now overflowing. "You destroyed my life, Amanda. You slept with my husband, you lied to me, and now you're trying to act like the victim? Don't make me laugh." Amanda visibly trembled at Claire's words, her vulnerability written all over her face. "I know I did everything wrong. But I didn't know things would get to this point. I didn't know Ethan was like this." Claire shook her head in disbelief. "You knew exactly who he was. You just chose to ignore it because you thought it would be different with you. You thought somehow he would treat you better than he treated me. And now you're finding out that, in the end, you're just another disposable piece in his game." The tension between them grew with every word, and Claire could see that Amanda was on the verge of tears. Part of her wondered if she should feel some compassion, some trace of pity for this woman. But as she looked at Amanda, all she could see was how much she had contributed to her pain. There was no room left for forgiveness or pity. "I just don't know what to do anymore," Amanda whispered, almost as if she were talking to herself. "I thought we had a life together, that with the baby, everything would be different." This was the first time Amanda mentioned the baby, and Claire's heart gave a small, painful twinge. She was still processing the fact that Amanda was pregnant with Ethan's child, and as much as she tried to stay strong, it deeply affected her. The idea that they would have a life together while she was trying to rebuild her own life was unbearable. Claire took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions bubbling up inside her. Amanda, I really don't care anymore what you do. If you want to stay in this mess with Ethan, fine. But don't think I'm going to help you get out of it. You made your choices, and now you're going to have to live with them. Amanda finally let a tear fall, quickly wiping it away with her trembling hand. Claire watched her, without any sign of pity. It was too late for that. I just wanted a chance to start over, Amanda whispered, her voice shaky. I thought we could be friends again. Claire laughed, a short and bitter sound. Friends? You think you can just erase everything that happened? Like it's possible to go back in time and pretend none of this happened? No, Amanda. You destroyed me. You were complicit with Ethan in everything. There's no going back from that. Amanda was silent, Claire's words hanging heavy over her. It seemed that, in that moment, she finally understood that Claire wouldn't be her salvation. She had sunk too deep into Ethan's lies, and now she was completely alone. As Claire stood to leave, she looked at Amanda one last time. You made your choice, Amanda, and now you'll have to live with it. Good luck with Ethan. You're going to need it. She walked away, feeling Amanda's gaze burn into her back. There was something liberating about finally saying those words, about finally seeing Amanda so vulnerable. Claire knew there was nothing more to say between them. The chapter of her life with Amanda and Ethan was closing, and for the first time, she was ready to move forward. With Amanda completely out of her way, Claire felt that the final piece of her plan was about to be put into place. The idea of a public takedown came to her when she learned that Ethan's company was planning an event to promote new executives, and Ethan was among them. The irony was unbearable. He was on the verge of being rewarded professionally, gaining recognition while his personal life was crumbling. Claire couldn't let that happen. He didn't deserve to be rewarded for the lies and frauds he had built over the years. That night, as she reviewed all the documents and evidence she had accumulated, Claire realized this would be the decisive moment. Everything she had planned culminated in this public denunciation. She prepared herself with cold calculation, knowing she couldn't let her emotions get in the way. What she was about to do wasn't just personal revenge. It was a public exposure of Ethan's lies and manipulations. It was the final reckoning, and Claire was ready for it. The event was scheduled for a Friday evening, at a luxurious hotel in the city. Executives, directors, and employees from all departments would be present. It was the perfect setting for what Claire had in mind. She planned every detail, the exact moment that denunciation would take place, the documents she would hand to Ethan's superiors, and how everything would be revealed in front of everyone. There was no room for error. In the week leading up to the event, Ethan was agitated. He knew that the investigations into his fraud were still ongoing, but he believed his promotion was guaranteed. Claire could see the nervousness in his gestures, but he tried to hide it, maintaining a facade of confidence. It was almost pathetic how he clung to the idea that he could escape the consequences. On the night of the event, Claire dressed with the same precision with which she had prepared her plan. Her dress was simple but elegant, and her behavior was impeccable. She arrived at the hotel and was immediately greeted by familiar faces, many of whom had praised Ethan over the years. Claire exchanged polite smiles and greetings, but inside, she felt the adrenaline building. The clock was ticking, and soon, everything would be exposed. As the opening speeches began, Claire sat at a table near the stage where Ethan and other executives were positioned. She watched his every move, every word he exchanged with colleagues, and waited for the right moment to act. When the CEO took the stage to announce the promotions, the room fell silent. Claire knew this was the moment. Her heart raced, but her mind was focused on the goal. As soon as Ethan's name was mentioned, Claire stood up. There was a respectful hush in the room as the CEO praised Ethan for his invaluable contributions to the company. Every word made Claire's blood boil. She took a few steps forward and, without hesitation, spoke clearly. "Excuse me, but I think everyone here needs to know something before any promotions are made." The room froze. All eyes turned to Claire, including Ethan's. The confusion on his face quickly turned to panic as he realized what was about to happen. "Ethan Donovan is not the man you think he is," Claire continued, her voice firm and controlled. "He is a fraud. And I have all the proof right here." She held up the document she had prepared, detailing every financial fraud, every manipulation of numbers, and every misappropriation of funds that Ethan had committed. There was a murmur of shock in the room. The CEO looked at Ethan, clearly confused and alarmed, while the other executives whispered among themselves. Claire, without losing her composure, went on. "He embezzled money from the company, created fraudulent contracts, and is involved in numerous illegal activities. And if anyone here doubts it, here's the proof." She handed the documents to the CEO, who took them with trembling hands, his eyes quickly scanning the numbers and emails detailing every suspicious transaction. Ethan was paralyzed, his face pale. For the first time, Claire saw true terror in his eyes. He knew there was no way out. The silence in the room was almost palpable as everyone waited for the superior's reaction. The CEO, still shocked by what he was reading, looked at Ethan. "Is this true?" He could barely form the words. Ethan stammered, trying to defend himself. This is a lie. Someone set me up. I would never do this." But no one believed him. The evidence was irrefutable, and Claire had made sure that every detail was accurate. She stood there, firm, watching as the truth finally crashed down on Ethan like an unstoppable wave. In the minutes that followed, everything fell apart for him. The CEO ordered security to remove him from the event immediately, while the other executives debated what to do with the information. Ethan tried to resist, but it was useless. He was escorted out, still denying everything, but everyone knew his career was over. Claire, on the other hand, felt a strange calm settle over her. The plan had been executed perfectly. Ethan was ruined, exposed in front of everyone. She watched as he was taken away and for a brief moment felt a wave of satisfaction. But that feeling quickly dissipated, leaving only emptiness. The truth was, even though Claire had achieved what she wanted, the peace she had been searching for didn't come immediately. Ethan's downfall didn't erase the years of pain and betrayal. But she knew that, at least now, he would pay for everything he had done. And that, in itself, was a beginning. After the event, Claire stepped away from the chaos and went to a quieter corner of the hotel. As she breathed deeply, feeling the tension leave her body, Alex appeared at her side. He had stayed in the background, watching the entire situation unfold, knowing this was a moment Claire needed to face alone. "You did what needed to be done," he said, his voice soft and comforting. Claire looked at him, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Yes, I did. But I don't feel that different. I still feel empty." Alex nodded, understanding perfectly. Revenge never brings the peace we expect. But you're free now. Free of him. Free of the weight of all this. And that's what you need to hold on to. Claire was silent, processing Alex's words. He was right. Ethan's downfall wasn't the end of her journey, but the beginning of something new. Now she had the chance to rebuild her life, to move forward without the shadows of Ethan and Amanda hanging over her. As they left the hotel together, Claire felt a glimmer of hope. She knew there was still a long road ahead, but with Alex by her side and with the truth finally exposed, she was ready for whatever came next. On the day of the big event, Claire and Alex arrived at the venue with their plan carefully crafted. The atmosphere in the hotel was one of celebration, but for Claire, it marked the final stage of her revenge against Ethan. She and Alex had worked together to expose all of Ethan's frauds and betrayals. And now, in front of everyone, Ethan would face the consequences. The tension in the room was palpable as the speeches began, and Claire, standing beside Alex, waited for the right moment to act. She knew that, in addition to confronting Ethan publicly, she would have to face Amanda one last time. The pain of knowing Amanda was pregnant with Ethan's child was still fresh, but Claire had decided that this would be the last time that woman held any power over her. Right after the public denunciation, as chaos spread through the room, Claire noticed Amanda standing in the distance, watching the scene with a mix of shock and concern. Her expression clearly showed that, although she was involved with Ethan, she had no idea how deep his frauds and lies went. It was the perfect moment for the final confrontation. Claire approached Amanda with firm steps, head held high, feeling adrenaline rushing through her body. Amanda looked disoriented when she saw Claire coming, but she tried to maintain the poised demeanor she always showed. However, Claire was no longer the same woman Amanda knew. She had evolved, and now she was ready to close this chapter once and for all. "I know everything, Amanda," Claire said without hesitation, her voice firm. Amanda blinked, clearly surprised, and Claire continued, not giving her a chance to respond. "I know about the baby, I know about you and Ethan, and I know exactly what you two did to me. I won't fall for your manipulations anymore." Amanda hesitated for a moment, perhaps hoping Claire was bluffing. She looked ready to deny or defend herself, but Claire cut her off again. "You two can have whatever life you want, but I'm no longer part of this game. Ethan will face the consequences of everything he's done, and you'll have to deal with it on your own." Amanda finally regained her composure, her expression shifting from surprise to a mix of defensiveness and regret. "I didn't want things to end like this, Claire. I didn't know things would get to this point. Ethan, he told me he was unhappy with you and that he loved me." Claire gave a bitter smile, as if she had expected that response. "Of course he said that. Ethan is a liar, Amanda. He always was. And you chose to believe him even when you knew it was wrong. Now both of you will have to live with the consequences of the choices you made." Amanda lowered her gaze, clearly shaken, but Claire no longer felt the weight of that betrayal as she once did. The confrontation she had imagined with Amanda for so many months now seemed almost irrelevant. There was no more anger, no more pain, just a sense of liberation. Claire knew that, finally, she was letting go of everything Amanda and Ethan represented. "You have a child on the way," Claire continued, her tone softer but still firm. "And I hope you're ready for what that means. Ethan won't be the man you expect him to be, and you know that, deep down. He's going to destroy you too, just like he destroyed everything around him." Amanda lifted her eyes to Claire, her lips trembling. I don't know what to do now. Everything is out of control. I never imagined it would be like this." Claire felt a slight pang of something close to compassion, but she reminded herself of all the suffering she had endured. It wasn't her responsibility to save Amanda. She had chosen this path. "You'll figure out what to do. But don't count on me for that." With those words, Claire turned away, leaving Amanda standing alone amidst the chaos. There was something incredibly freeing about finally saying goodbye to that part of her life. Claire looked ahead, toward the future, knowing that for the first time in a long time, she was in control of her own destiny. As she approached Alex, who was waiting at a distance, Claire felt a huge weight lift from her shoulders. He smiled when he saw her, and she returned the smile, feeling an unexpected peace. "How did it go?" Alex asked, with a look of concern but also support. "It was necessary," Claire replied, taking a deep breath. "I said everything I needed to say." Alex nodded, understanding. "You're finally free of it." Claire looked at him, realizing just how important Alex had been in her journey. He had been by her side through the toughest moments, offering not just support, but the perspective she needed to move forward. And now, with Ethan out of her life and Amanda too, Claire felt ready to start rebuilding herself not as a victim, but as someone who had overcome her worst pains. "I am free," Claire said with a small smile. "Free to start over." The event had turned into chaos, with Ethan being escorted out by security and the executives scrambling to manage the fallout. But Claire, standing next to Alex, didn't care anymore. She didn't need to witness Ethan's downfall to feel satisfied. She had done what she needed to, and now, all that mattered was the future that awaited her. They left the hotel together, the night air bringing a sense of renewal to Claire. Alex, always by her side, didn't say much, but his presence was all she needed in that moment. "Thank you, Alex," she said finally, as they reached the car, "for everything." Alex smiled, holding her hand briefly before opening the car door. "I told you, Claire, you're much stronger than you realize." Claire got into the car, feeling an unusual calm. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but now, with Ethan exposed and Amanda out of her life, she was ready to face it. This time, with the certainty that she would never be manipulated or betrayed again. The public exposure of Ethan went exactly as Claire had planned. After the event, Ethan's frauds quickly spread throughout the company and the media, ruining his career and reputation definitively. He was fired immediately, and any chance of rebuilding his professional life seemed impossible. The public humiliation was devastating for him, and now, without a job and with his name tarnished, Ethan distanced himself from everyone, isolating himself in an attempt to deal with the consequences. Amanda, now pregnant and without Ethan's support, was desperate. The news of the frauds also affected her, making her situation public and vulnerable. She, who had believed she had secured a future alongside Ethan, found herself alone, without the support of the man she thought loved her. Unable to face this new reality alone, Amanda sought Claire, looking for one last request for forgiveness. When Amanda approached Claire's house, her face was marked by tears, her eyes red and swollen. Claire opened the door, and upon seeing Amanda, she knew that this moment would be inevitable. Amanda, once so sure of herself, was completely defeated. Without another word, she collapsed in tears before Claire, her posture of superiority and arrogance now non-existent. "Claire, please forgive me," Amanda begged, her voice broken by emotion. "I didn't know it would all end like this. I never wanted it to go this far." For a moment, Claire observed the scene in front of her with a mixture of shock and coldness. Amanda, the woman who had been complicit in all of Ethan's lies and betrayals, was now at her door, begging for forgiveness. Part of Claire had never imagined seeing Amanda so vulnerable, but at the same time, her plea didn't move her. There was no longer any room in her heart for compassion or reconciliation. "Do you really think an apology will fix everything?" Claire asked, her voice calm but firm. "You betrayed my trust, destroyed my marriage, and still expected to walk away unscathed. Now that everything has fallen apart, you're here asking for forgiveness? That's not how it works, Amanda." Amanda sobbed, unable to hold back the tears. "I know I was wrong. I know I made horrible choices, but I thought I was doing the right thing. Ethan convinced me of so many lies. I just wanted a chance to start over." Claire took a deep breath, watching Amanda for a few more seconds. It was painful to see that woman, who had caused so much suffering, begging before her. But at the same time, Claire knew Amanda had made her choices. She chose to believe in Ethan, chose to betray, and now she had to deal with the consequences of her own actions. "Start over?" Claire repeated, disbelief in her voice. "You chose this path, Amanda. You knew you were wrong and went ahead anyway. And now you're paying the price. I'm not responsible for forgiving you or helping you move forward." Amanda, her face wet with tears, raised her hand, gently gripping Claire's arm in a final desperate effort. "Please, Claire, I have no one else. I'm going to have a child, alone." Claire looked at Amanda's hand on her arm and with a firm movement, brushed it off. "That's your choice, Amanda. You're alone because you chose to be. What you did can't be undone, and I have nothing more to do with your life." Amanda, with one final sob, understood that there was nothing more to be said. Claire would not help her. She was truly alone. Without another word, Amanda got up and walked away slowly from Claire's house. She knew that her future would be uncertain and full of challenges, but she had finally accepted that her actions had placed her in that position. When Amanda disappeared from view, Claire closed the door and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of lightness. There were no more ties binding her to the past, no emotional obligations to Ethan or Amanda. She had overcome them both, and now her life was ready to be rebuilt. In the silence of the house, Claire felt that this chapter of her life was finally closed. Ethan was out of her life forever, his career destroyed, and Amanda, with all her manipulations and lies, no longer had any power over her. Claire was truly free. Hours later, Alex arrived to visit her. They talked for a while, and Claire told him about Amanda's request for forgiveness. "And how do you feel now?" Alex asked, always attentive to Claire's emotions. "Relieved," she answered after a moment of reflection. "Not because Amanda asked for forgiveness, but because I have nothing to do with them anymore. It's like, finally, I can start over." Alex smiled softly. "You've been through so much, Claire. Now it's time to focus on the future. A future that you can build your way without looking back." Claire nodded, feeling a sense of hope grow inside her. For the first time, she no longer felt anger or a need for revenge. What had begun as a journey to destroy those who hurt her had turned into something bigger, a journey to reclaim herself. When Alex said goodbye that night, Claire found herself sitting in silence, looking toward the future with a new perspective. There was much to do, much to rebuild, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. Ethan and Amanda belonged to the past. Now she could finally live for herself. Claire sat in silence for a long time after Amanda left, reflecting on what had happened. As much as she had expected to feel complete satisfaction, seeing Amanda beg for forgiveness, the feeling that overwhelmed her was relief, not triumph. The journey that began with an unrelenting thirst for revenge now seemed to have reached its end, but in a way different from what she had imagined. The emotional freedom she had long sought had finally arrived, but not from destroying Amanda or Ethan, but from realizing they no longer held any power over her life. Sitting in her living room, Claire looked out the window, watching the night fall. She knew her life would never be the same, but not because of what Ethan or Amanda had done. The change was within her. For months, Claire had lived with the belief that the end of Ethan's career and Amanda's isolation would bring the peace she so desperately craved. But now, with both of them out of her way, she realized that true peace had come from recognizing that their power over her life had vanished. A few days later, while organizing her house, Claire found old photo albums, many from the early years of her marriage to Ethan. She hesitated for a moment before opening the pages. The images were from a time when she believed her life was on track, that the love she felt for Ethan was reciprocal and true. Now, all of that seemed like part of a distant story, almost as if it belonged to someone else. Claire closed the album, feeling that it was time to leave the past behind. However, not everything in her life was just about letting go of the past. There was also the present, and Alex was an important part of that. From the beginning, he had been by her side, not just as a friend, but as someone who understood her pain and struggles. He not only supported her, but also challenged her to be stronger, to believe that she could rebuild her life in a better and healthier way. With Alex, Claire felt something different, something she hadn't felt in a long time: trust. On a quiet evening, a few weeks after the final confrontation with Amanda, Alex invited Claire to dinner. She accepted, feeling that this invitation wasn't just a simple outing between friends, but something more. There was a new energy between them, something they both knew but hadn't yet directly addressed. During dinner, Alex looked at Claire with that calm smile that always made her feel that everything would be okay. "You seem different," he commented as they ate. "You seem more at peace." Claire smiled back, knowing exactly what he meant. "I think I've finally gotten rid of all the ghosts from the past." "I knew you would," Alex said, briefly taking her hand across the table. "You're much stronger than you think." Claire was silent for a moment, feeling the warmth of that connection. She realized that Alex had always seen her in a way that even she hadn't been able to see herself. He saw her strength, her ability to move forward, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. And at that moment, Claire finally accepted that. She was no longer the broken woman who had been betrayed. She was someone who had overcome one of life's greatest pains and come out stronger on the other side. "I still don't know what the future holds," Claire said, her voice soft. "But I think, for the first time, I'm ready to find out." Alex smiled, and she felt a wave of calm. "You don't have to know everything now. You just need to know that you can trust yourself and in what you build from here on out." The night continued peacefully, without pressure or urgency. Claire realized that for a long time, she had been in a constant battle to regain control of her life. But now, with the past buried and the shadows of Ethan and Amanda gone, she finally felt that control had returned. As the night wore on and the two walked together through the quiet streets, Claire allowed herself to think about what might come next. It wasn't about revenge or reparation anymore. It was about starting over, about believing that something good was waiting for her beyond all the pain she had endured. And with Alex by her side, she knew she was ready to take the first step toward that new future. Claire was finally beginning to feel free. After months of struggle, she had exposed Ethan, destroyed his career, and severed her ties with Amanda once and for all. The weight of the past seemed to be fading, and now, with Alex by her side, she felt ready to move forward. However, a part of her had always known that Ethan wouldn't disappear so easily. His public humiliation and loss of control had made him more unstable and unpredictable. It was on a cold, sunny morning that Claire saw him for the last time. She was busy with some household tasks when she heard loud knocks on the front door. Her heart raced, a strange feeling of dread washing over her. When she opened the door, there he was. Ethan, with darkened eyes and an expression filled with hatred and frustration. His once confident posture now appeared full of desperation. Claire stood in silence for a few seconds before breaking it. "What do you want, Ethan?" Her voice was firm, controlled, but there was a tension in the air that couldn't be ignored. Ethan stepped forward, his shoulders tense, his eyes burning with anger. "You destroyed me, Claire. Ruined my career, my life, and now you expect to move on like nothing happened." Claire stood her ground, not backing down. She had known this moment would come, but this time, she didn't feel the fear he once managed to instill in her. "You destroyed your own life, Ethan. I only exposed the truth. The lies, the fraud, everything was your choice. My choice?" Ethan spat the words, stepping closer, now just a few feet from her. "You ruined me. I could have fixed things, I could have worked it out, but you betrayed me." The irony of his words made Claire let out a bitter laugh. "Betrayal?" She shook her head in disbelief. "You're talking about betrayal? After everything you did to me? You lied, cheated, and destroyed our marriage. And now you want to blame me for your failure?" Ethan was silent for a moment, his face twisted with hatred. He was clearly on the edge of a breakdown, his ego bruised, his reputation shattered. But even so, he made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "I can still ruin you, Claire. You think this is over, but it's not. I know people. I can destroy what's left of your life. Don't think this is finished." The words that once would have shaken Claire to her core now felt empty. She looked at him with the same coldness she had developed over the past few months. "You don't have any power over me anymore, Ethan. You can try whatever you want, but you've already lost." Ethan clenched his fists by his sides, his jaw tightening. He was clearly frustrated by her lack of reaction. For years, he had controlled her emotions, manipulated her insecurities, but now Claire was in control. And he knew it. "You think you're free, but you're not," he said, trying to sound threatening. "I can still destroy you. I can still end what you've built." Claire looked him straight in the eye, feeling the blood rush through her veins, but not out of fear, out of an unshakable conviction. "Ethan, I warned you that your actions would have consequences. What's happening to you now is just the result of your own choices. I'm no longer the woman you deceived, and nothing you do will change that." Ethan stood there, motionless, as if waiting for a reaction, as if he needed to see her falter, to show some sign that he could still control her. But Claire didn't budge. He was defeated, and for the first time, he seemed to truly understand that there was nothing more he could do to change it. "You're pathetic," Claire finally said, with devastating calm. "You betrayed me, destroyed me emotionally, but none of that mattered in the end. You're the only one responsible for your downfall, and now you're alone." For a moment, Ethan hesitated. The silence between them stretched on, and Claire saw the glimmer of desperation in his eyes. "I swear you'll pay for this," he murmured, his words weaker, less certain than before. Claire stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I'm not going to pay for anything, Ethan. Because I'm already free. Free of you, free of everything you represent. And no matter what you do, you can't change that." Ethan's threat dissolved into the air. He knew, just as Claire did, that there was nothing more to be done. He was defeated, exposed, and humiliated, and his words, once so full of power, no longer had any effect on her. Without another word, Ethan slowly turned and walked toward the exit. Claire watched him, saying nothing, knowing that this was the moment that finally ended everything. He left her life the same way he had entered it, full of false promises, full of lies, but this time she was no longer the victim. As she closed the door, Claire felt a deep sense of relief. The end truly had come. Ethan no longer had a place in her mind, in her emotions. For the first time, she was completely free of him, free of his emotional control, his lies, his influence. And most importantly, she was ready for whatever came next. A few hours later, Alex arrived at Claire's house, bringing with him a quiet sense of serenity. When she opened the door, he looked at her with his usual calm, but his eyes were filled with concern. "Is everything okay?" he asked gently. Claire nodded, feeling the weight of the day slowly dissipating. "Yes, I've finally gotten rid of him." Alex smiled, a light but understanding smile. He stepped inside, and the two sat down on the couch, where Claire recounted the details of the confrontation. Alex, as always, listened silently, not interrupting, giving her the space she needed to process what had happened. "You did what you needed to do," he said when she finished. "You stood up for yourself, and now you're free. For real." Claire looked at him, feeling lighter than she had ever felt. "Yes," she replied, with a soft smile. "I am free." The confrontation with Ethan had been the last piece Claire needed to truly move on. It no longer mattered what he said or did. She was beyond all of it now. And with Alex by her side, Claire knew that the future, though uncertain, was promising. They spent the rest of the evening talking, without haste, without the weight of the past hanging over them. Claire's emotional freedom was palpable, and she knew that, finally, she was ready to live her life in a way she had never imagined before. As Alex said goodbye later that night, Claire looked up at the starry sky and took a deep breath. The end of a journey had arrived, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Now Claire knew she could face anything because, at last, she was the author of her own story. After the final confrontation with Ethan, Claire began to discover a new phase of her life. She was finally feeling free to move forward, but she knew there were still many emotional wounds to heal. Her relationship with Alex, who had been her anchor throughout the chaos, was starting to change subtly, and Claire could no longer ignore what was growing between them. There was something in the way Alex looked at her, how he was always there, offering unconditional support, that made her feel things she wasn't fully ready to face. That night, Alex invited her over for dinner at his apartment. It was a simple invitation, without high expectations, but Claire sensed a different tension in the air. She knew an important conversation was about to happen. Alex, with his careful manner and constant respect for her boundaries, was probably going to say what had been clear for a while. He felt something more for her, and she could no longer deny what she had been feeling as well. When Claire arrived at Alex's apartment, she was greeted with his usual warm smile. The apartment was bathed in soft light, creating an intimate and calm atmosphere. The table was set simply, but with the same attention to detail that was typical of Alex. He always knew how to do things in a way that made Claire feel comfortable, without pressure or grand gestures, just sincerity. The dinner was pleasant, and the conversation flowed naturally, as it always did between them. They talked about the future, about the changes in Claire's life since Ethan had left the picture. But even though the conversation was light, there was something unspoken between them. Claire could feel the tension, that sense that at any moment a deeper conversation would begin. And indeed, after finishing dinner and sitting on the couch to relax, Alex remained silent for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. He looked at her in a different way, with an intense, more profound gaze. Claire knew what was coming, and part of her felt a flutter in her stomach. She was ready to listen, but at the same time, there was still something inside her that hesitated. "Claire," Alex began, his voice low and soft, but filled with sincerity. "I know we've been through a lot over the past few months, and the focus has always been on helping you overcome everything that happened. I didn't want to complicate things, but I feel like I need to be honest with you." Claire felt her heart beat a little faster. She kept her eyes on his, waiting for him to continue. "Go ahead, Alex," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. He took a deep breath before continuing. "I have feelings for you, Claire. Something that goes beyond friendship. I've tried not to push. I've tried to be as respectful as possible, but I can't pretend these feelings don't exist anymore." Alex's words hung in the air, and Claire felt a mix of emotions wash over her. It wasn't a complete surprise, but hearing those words made the weight of reality settle over her in a different way. There was something between them, she knew that. But at the same time, there was a block inside her, an emotional barrier that prevented her from fully committing to any kind of relationship. Alex continued, sensing her silence. "I understand that you're still healing from everything that happened with Ethan. I know there are still many wounds. And the last thing I want is to rush you or force you into anything. But I needed to be honest with you about how I feel." Claire looked away for a moment, trying to process what he had said. She knew Alex was being sincere, and that he would never pressure her or put her in an uncomfortable position. But the truth was, she was torn too. She had feelings for him, of course, but she was still healing, still dealing with the traumas of the past. "Alex," she began, her voice a bit hesitant, "I feel something for you too. I can't deny that, but I'm still healing. Everything that happened with Ethan left scars, and I don't know if I'm ready to enter into a new relationship right now. I don't want to hurt you, but I need to be honest about where I am emotionally." Alex nodded, his calm, understanding look always reassuring her. "I get it, Claire. I didn't expect you to be ready. I just wanted you to know how I feel, without expecting anything in return. We can take things one step at a time, no rush." Alex's offer brought immediate relief to Claire. He was giving her the space she needed, without pressure, without expectations. He, as always, was by her side, offering support and patience. "Thank you for that," she said with a slight smile. "I just need time. Knowing that you're willing to wait and go slow means a lot to me." Alex smiled back, and she felt an unexpected peace. "We can figure this out together, at your pace. I'm not going anywhere." The unspoken promise in those words made Claire relax. She knew Alex was here to stay, that he wasn't just saying this to comfort her, but because he truly meant it. And that made her believe, for the first time, that maybe she could open herself up to something new, without fear of getting hurt again. The night continued with a lighter atmosphere. They talked about the future, about the little plans Claire was making for her life, now that Ethan and Amanda were out of the picture. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had the space to think about herself, to rebuild. And with Alex by her side, she felt like she could do it with someone who truly cared. When it was time to leave, Claire said goodbye to Alex with a hug that lasted a little longer than usual. There was something different about that gesture, a deeper connection that didn't need words. They both knew they were moving towards something bigger, but without rushing, without the need to define everything right away. It was exactly what Claire needed: time, space, and the certainty that she was in control of her own pace. As she left Alex's apartment, Claire took a deep breath, feeling a lightness in the air. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the future but felt calm, confident that things would work out naturally. And with Alex, she knew she could take things one step at a time without fear of losing her way. That morning, when Claire woke up, the air felt different. The sky was clear, with soft clouds against the vibrant blue, as if reflecting the new chapter of her life. She had faced the darkest moments she never imagined possible, and now, with Ethan and Amanda out of her life, things were finally falling back into place. Yet, deep down, she knew that in some way, Ethan wouldn't accept defeat easily. Despite his ruined career and all the lies exposed, Claire had an unsettling feeling that Ethan hadn't completely given up. He had always been obsessed with control, and with the collapse of everything he had built, there was little left but his wounded pride. For Ethan, it didn't matter how desperate his situation was. He always believed he could rise again if he found one last opportunity. As Claire left for work that morning, she paused at her front door, observing the world with new eyes. Alex had been a constant source of support, and their dinner a few days ago reaffirmed his commitment to her. He was willing to wait, to give Claire the space she needed to process her feelings and move forward at her own pace. While she felt relief knowing she was in control of her love life, she still had to face the final ghost from her past, Ethan. That afternoon, while Claire was at work, she received a strange email. The sender appeared generic, unsigned, and the subject intrigued her: "Crucial information for your case." As she opened the message, her expression grew serious. The email contained details of supposed evidence against her, accusing Claire of being involved in financial fraud and manipulating information to harm Ethan. The accusations were absurd but well-crafted, as if someone was trying to plant the idea that Claire was involved in illicit activities to get revenge on her ex-husband. Claire immediately knew this had Ethan's fingerprints all over it. This was his last trick, his desperate attempt to drag her down with him. He was trying to flip the narrative, making Claire out to be the villain of the story. It was a predictable move, but a dangerous one. Claire's first reaction was a mix of anger and frustration. She couldn't believe that even after everything he had done, Ethan was still trying to destroy her. Knowing she needed to act carefully, Claire called Alex to meet her that night. As she waited for him, her thoughts spun around the situation. Claire knew that if Ethan was willing to forge evidence, he could seriously complicate her life. He still had some powerful contacts, and even in his downfall, he had access to resources that could put Claire in a vulnerable position. When Alex arrived, he found Claire more agitated than usual. She greeted him with a hug, but her mind was still focused on the implications of Ethan's threat. "I knew he wouldn't give up," she said as they sat in the living room. Alex watched her calmly, his expression always careful and attentive. "What has he done this time?" Claire showed him the email, explaining how it seemed like a carefully crafted trap to tarnish her reputation. "He's trying to drag me back into that hell. Alex, he's trying to pin the fraud on me when he's the one who manipulated everything from the start." Alex read the email silently, his eyes scanning the lines of the false accusations. When he finished, he looked at Claire with a serious, determined expression. "This isn't going to work, Claire. He's trying to intimidate you, to make you doubt yourself. But we can't let this affect you." Claire took a deep breath, trying to absorb Alex's words. He always knew what to say, how to offer support without pushing too hard. But even with his reassuring presence, Claire knew she would have to face Ethan once and for all. She had won all the previous battles, but this one would be different. Now, Ethan was playing dirty, using what little influence he had left to try and destroy what she had built. In the days that followed, Claire contacted her lawyers, ensuring everything was in place to handle any attempt by Ethan to defame her. She began gathering evidence of her innocence, revisiting documents, and making sure all the fraud was clearly linked to him. Despite the tension, Claire didn't allow herself to be consumed by fear. She knew Ethan was cornered, and his final move was one made out of desperation. One morning, as Claire was reviewing emails at work, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number, but she recognized the threatening tone immediately. "You can't escape what you've done, Claire. Soon, everyone will know the truth." The threat was clear, but instead of feeling the old fear that Ethan once provoked, Claire felt a wave of determination. She knew she needed to confront Ethan once and for all, to end any last remnants of emotional control he was trying to exert over her. Determined to put an end to this, Claire called Ethan directly. The phone rang several times before he finally answered. His voice on the other end was cold but filled with arrogance. "Finally decided to talk to me?" "Ethan," Claire began, her voice steady, "I know what you're doing. And it's not going to work." There was silence on the other end before Ethan replied. "You think you can just destroy me and walk away unscathed? You think you'll escape all this without facing consequences? I didn't destroy anything, Ethan. You did that all on your own. And now, you're trying to drag me down with you, but it won't work. I'm not the same woman you manipulated." Ethan let out a sarcastic laugh. "You think you're so strong now, don't you? But I know you, Claire. I know how you think, how to get to you. And when all of this comes out, you'll fall with me." Claire's blood boiled, but she wouldn't let herself fall into Ethan's trap. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Ethan. Do what you want, say what you want, but the truth will always come out. I have enough evidence to show who you really are. And this time, you have no one left to protect you." The silence on the other end was long, as if Ethan was processing what she had said. When he finally spoke, his voice was colder than before. "You'll regret this." "No, Ethan," Claire replied firmly. "The only one who's going to regret all of this is you." She hung up before he could respond. Claire sat in silence for a moment, feeling the weight of the confrontation. But unlike all the previous times, she didn't feel vulnerable or at Ethan's mercy. She had faced her fears, and more importantly, she had freed herself from them. In the days that followed, Ethan's attempts to tarnish her reputation began to lose momentum. With the help of her lawyers and trusted people, Claire was able to prove that all the allegations against her were false. The evidence of her innocence, along with the documents exposing Ethan, was more than enough to shut down any attempt at retaliation. Ethan, realizing that his final move had failed, disappeared from the scene. His threats became hollow, and he finally accepted that his time controlling Claire's life had come to an end. That night, as Claire was at home, Alex came to visit. They sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. Claire took a deep breath, feeling a lightness she had never experienced before. "It's over," she said, with a peaceful smile on her face. Alex looked at her, his gaze full of pride and affection. "Yes, it's over. And you won." Claire smiled, feeling stronger than ever. The chapter of her life with Ethan was finally closed. and she was ready to move forward without fear, without chains, and with a newfound confidence in herself. Claire was beginning to discover what it truly meant to live without the chains of her past. The weight she had carried for so long was finally dissipating. Each day brought a new sense of freedom, and with Ethan definitively out of her life, she felt like she could finally rediscover herself. With Alex by her side, a man who had always been patient and respectful, Claire was ready to open the doors to a new chapter, one filled with self-discovery and happiness. The weeks that followed were filled with a lightness that Claire hardly recognized as part of her own life. Conversations with Alex flowed even more naturally than before, and she felt that, slowly, the emotional barriers she had built were being undone. There was no rush, and this absence of urgency brought the peace of mind she had longed for. One Saturday morning, Claire woke up to the soft sunlight streaming through the window. Next to her, Alex was still asleep, his breathing calm, as if reflecting the calmness that now filled her life. She sat up in bed, observing the world around her with fresh eyes. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to simply be in the present, without being haunted by the past or anxious about the future. When Alex woke up, he found her lost in thought, but this time, there was something different. It wasn't the way he used to see her carry, but rather a lightness, a peaceful smile on her face. "What is it?" he asked, stretching in bed and watching her with that loving look that always made Claire feel so safe. She chuckled softly and shrugged. "Just thinking about how much everything has changed. For so long, I thought I'd never feel this. The sense of peace again. But now, here I am, and everything feels so different." Alex moved closer, gently brushing his fingers across her face. "You deserve every bit of this peace, Claire. And it's only the beginning." She leaned into him, feeling the comforting warmth of his presence, and allowed herself to be embraced by the sensation of finally being home. It wasn't a physical place, but rather the emotional security she felt with Alex. He was her safe harbor, and it didn't mean he would save her from everything, but that she was no longer alone on her journey. In the days that followed, Claire began to take control of her life in ways she had never considered before. She decided to pick up old projects that she had abandoned while still married to Ethan. Life with him had become stifling, consuming her time and energy until she set aside her own dreams to support his. Now, without Ethan's shadow looming over her, Claire felt it was time to reclaim everything she had left behind. One of the first things she did was return to painting. It was something she had always loved, but had abandoned during her marriage. Her home was now filled with canvases, brushes, and paints, and the familiar smell of fresh paint brought back happy memories of a time when art was her greatest passion. Alex encouraged her, supporting her every step of the way. He not only appreciated her work, but also pushed her to believe in the value of her talent. "Why don't you do an exhibition?" Alex suggested one night while admiring one of her latest paintings, a vibrant piece full of life and color, reflecting the transformation Claire had been going through. She looked at him, surprised. "You think anyone would be interested in my paintings?" "I think people would see in them what I see," he replied with a confident smile. "You have something to say through your art, Claire. And now that you're allowing yourself to feel everything again, you're more ready than ever to share that with the world." Claire thought about the idea for a few days, initially hesitant, but as she talked with Alex and close friends, she began to realize that perhaps it was time to show her art to the world. In the past, she had always been afraid of exposing herself, of not being good enough. But now, with her past behind her and with Alex's support, she felt that she was finally ready. With time, Claire allowed herself to be happy in ways she never imagined. Small moments of peace began to accumulate. A walk in the park, light-hearted conversations with friends, a quiet evening watching a movie. All these simple moments, which had once seemed distant and unattainable, were now part of her everyday life, and she allowed herself to enjoy them, without the ghost of the past hanging over every decision. Claire and Alex also began to explore new horizons together. They took weekend trips to small towns, visited art galleries, and got lost in endless conversations about the future. It wasn't a future they rushed toward, but one they were building naturally, step by step, as they both found balance between their individual journeys and the life they were beginning to build together. On one of those weekends, during a trip to a coastal town, Alex and Claire walked along the shoreline, their bare feet sinking into the soft sand. The gentle ocean breeze played with Claire's hair, and she felt deeply connected to the moment. Looking out at the sea, she reflected on how much her life had changed, how hard she had fought to get here. Alex, walking beside her, seemed to know exactly what she was thinking. "You're different, you know." Claire looked at him, laughing. "What do you mean?" "When I met you, there was a shadow over you," Alex replied, stopping and turning to face her directly. "You were always carrying something heavy, but now you're light, Claire. You're more confident, more yourself." She smiled, feeling his words hit a deep spot within her. "I think it's because, for the first time, I feel like I'm in control of my own life. I'm no longer at the mercy of what others want or expect from me. I'm living for myself." Alex nodded, clearly proud of her. "That's what I always knew you were capable of. You just needed to see it too." They continued walking, hand in silence. There was no need for words in that moment. The connection between them was clear, and Claire knew that, whatever the future held, she was ready to face it in a completely different way. For the first time, there was no fear or doubt. There was only a sense of freedom and the certainty that, no matter what happened, she was in control. Back in their city, Claire began planning her first art exhibition. The idea, which had once seemed distant and almost impossible, was now becoming a reality. With the help of friends and Alex, she organized every detail, from selecting the paintings to choosing the gallery space where the exhibition would be held. On the day of the opening, Claire felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. It was her first time showing her work to the world, and the fear of being judged still lingered, though much softer than before. When the first person entered the gallery and stopped in front of one of her paintings, Claire knew she had made the right decision. The attentive gaze, the reverent silence in front of her work, everything confirmed what Alex and her friends had always said. Her art had something to say, something that touched people. That evening, after the exhibition closed, Claire and Alex walked together down the street, once again hand in hand. There was a serenity in Claire that hadn't been there before, a sense of accomplishment. She had won her battles, closed the painful chapters of her life, and now she was ready to open the doors to a new future. As they walked in silence, Claire looked at Alex, and for the first time, she felt she could say the words she had been holding back. "I love you, Alex." He stopped, surprised, and then a smile spread across his face. "I love you too, Claire. I always have." And so, together, they began to write a new chapter, one that would be guided by Claire's strength, Alex's patience, and the promise that, finally, the past was behind them and the future was theirs to build.